now that we've figured out our technology issues. Calling this committee meeting from November 4th to order. In terms of order of operations tonight, we are going to follow the agenda from start to finish for the most part. We have one minor postponement in the middle, but otherwise we're in good shape. So public comments, consent agenda, reports, old business including the Reading and Writing Advisory Committee, Policy EBCFA data review, the ARPA full-day kindergarten budget strategy discussions. We will be postponing the hybrid meeting technology discussion. We have the potential appointment of school committee members to the advisory committee, policy IKF, which is the graduation requirements, and then we'll have a greater discussion at the end about the policy subcommittee and the remit and roles and responsibilities of other members of the committee as it is. So that's our order of operations. Public comment wise would be the time now. Public comment is for items not on the agenda. If there is anything that anybody wants to speak about that's not on the agenda, it is 3 minutes. It's to be directed to the chair, and we may or may not answer it necessarily, but we will listen and we will take notes and see if there's an action that follows. So with that said, are there any items for public comment? I see none. Okay, so thank you. So let's move on to the consent agenda, and do we have a motion for that?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Carla. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll do a hand vote. All in favor, raise hands. All opposed? And that passes 6-0. Okay, so we'll move on to the reports. Martha, you're up, right and early, ready for it. You ready to go?
Okay, so now that November has started, fall sports are slowly closed, and there have been a lot of senior nights happening in the last 2 weeks, celebrating the seniors and their last year playing in the sport at the Reading Rocket, which has been very exciting and very sad to watch. We're very close to the Arlington Drama Club's opening night, their zombie prom, which has been very long hours every week, and we've been working very hard, and school staff and students are eagerly awaiting their first performance, which is happening about 1 week. And also groups such as choir, cheerleading, student council, and class office members have been working very hard on plans and performances for the pep rally. And I am very excited that that's happening in about 2 or 3 weeks. And lastly, we recently completed class officer elections for all the grades in the last 2 weeks. So today was the class of 2022 elections, where students presented their prepared speeches to the grade, and after everyone could vote on their representatives, and this went very well. And these elections for all grades have been met with a lot of enthusiasm and participation, more than I've ever seen in the last 4 years, which is really great. More people are participating, but yeah, that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Martha. Okay, moving down our list. Dr. Stice?
Thank you. I am very excited about all of the work that is happening in Reading Public Schools. And as I say to you all the time, we have such amazing staff who are so dedicated and making a difference. And I wanted to take 1 second just to highlight a real unsung hero who is behind the scenes making sure everything went smoothly as we went through our audit process for circuit breaker, and still making sure everyone is on the same page and bolstered up is Alison Wright, our Director of Special Education. She is just doing an amazing job keeping all of the systems running. And another person who has really been working tirelessly is our new literacy specialist for special education, Renee Lamaro. She's been out working in classrooms. She has been consulting on cases, providing training to all the special education teachers at school-specific special ed update meetings. She's also done presentations for our paraeducators and our special education teachers. She's also been doing outreach to our substantially separate families to find out what their concerns are about reading and making sure we address them all. And she was instrumental in coordinating our VAVO training, which is going to take place at the last day of November. And the teachers will finish their last 6 hours of that training. And for those people who don't know, VAVO is a small group evidence-based literacy intervention curriculum for students grades 2 to 4. And so it really works on empowering students to read text deeply, to build new knowledge, develop new ideas, and reach new levels of reading achievement. And by November 30th, all of our elementary special education teachers will be fully trained in that program through Crafting Minds, which we've had a partnership. Also in November, on November 30th at 7 o'clock, we will be having our third of the series in reading and writing trainings rooted in the Scarborough's Reading Rope. Renee will be leading that work, and it's really going to take each component of reading and link it to instructional supports and practices and instructional implications. We'll be sending out more information about that, including a Zoom link, so everyone can log on. We will be recording it and posting it on our website for those who aren't able to join the live event. Additionally, we now have a new CPAC board. We are so grateful for Alyssa Scapriati, Amy Stewart, and Laura Noonan, who have been the board for the past year, and we have a new chair of the board who is the board at the moment. Her name is Kelly Kama, and she's going to be leading us. There will not be a CPAC meeting next week in November, but the CPAC will resume on December 14th with a meeting here at 7 o'clock. And then finally, we have sat here so many times talking about the nurses and how amazing they are, and the work that Mary Juliana has helped to ensure that they are understanding. And I just want to highlight something additionally they are doing besides all the pool testing and the critical care in their offices. Mandated screenings were on hold throughout the pandemic, and they are now going to be returning into schools with hearing and vision screenings at all levels. Historically, preschool and kindergarten students were asked to get their vision screened through their pediatricians. As part of the dyslexia guidance, we are now going to be screening all of our preschool and kindergarten students' vision in school, and Mary and her team are absolutely amazing, and they have already prepared for that screening. They borrowed something called a spot vision screener from the state to practice using it. It is very cool. They started today learning how to use that, so that we're going to be able to provide early referrals for any students who may have vision issues. And we've also applied for grant money to purchase our own spot screener and other updated tools to train everyone to use the screening. So people are very busy and working very hard to make sure our students have what they need.
Dr. Hardy?
Hi everyone. So I wanted to just spend a few minutes tonight filling everyone in on our very successful full-day staff professional day that was held this past Tuesday, November 2nd. And it is, it's a rare treat really for staff to have that full day to focus on their professional growth and to even when we have early release days, they have, students in the building in the morning and they're kind of rushing into their PD. So for staff to have a full day for themselves to focus on learning is really something special. We were able to have the whole staff come together in the morning on Tuesday, and we started started the day with a panel discussion in the pack. And then what came next was just so phenomenal and speaks to the incredible staff we have here in Reading. We had a series of workshops that were offered, about 20. They were led by staff here from the Reading Public Schools and a few community members. They all lasted about 75 minutes. And all of our workshops for the day and our panel discussion were focused around the theme of all means all. And the reason that we focused on that, because we believe right now in particular in our schools, it's essential that we ensure that each and every child is meeting with success, and that it is our job as educators to make sure that our instruction, our materials, our curriculum is geared to ensure that students can be successful. And so the day was really meant to focus on how we can improve our skills to ensure that we're able to meet the needs of all students. I want to just share with you a couple of the workshops just to give you a sense of really the expertise that lies within our staff. And again, this was something we asked staff to come forward if they were willing to share a practice that was working well for them in meeting the needs of all students, something they were willing to teach their colleagues. I stopped into many of the workshops. I know Dr. Milichewski and Dr. Seiss did as well, and we were just blown away by what our staff was teaching other staff. There were quite a number of workshops that focused on supporting the social emotional health of students. So for example, executive functioning within the classroom setting, anxiety in the high school classroom. One of our very popular ones, behavioral strategies that will benefit all students in the inclusion setting. So there was really a focus from staff around supporting students in that regard. There were other workshops that focused on how we can continue to leverage technology to ensure that all students have their needs met and that instruction is geared to meet everybody's needs. For example, Pear Deck is a subscription that we use. It's a program that allows teachers to make lessons more engaging and modify the way that students can respond. And so there was a workshop for that. We also had some of our community partners come in, which was really amazing. Erica McNamara came in to talk about some of the takeaways from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and how we might want to, how teachers might want to respond to that and understand that data. As we saw, that was very compelling. And we also had Teresa Wiggins of Village Parenting come in and talking with staff about how they can engage all families, regardless of which level, elementary, middle, through high school. After staff participated in the workshops on Tuesday, there was also time for them to meet with their departments to continue curriculum work, and then some building-based time as well for principals to be able to accomplish work with their staff. So overall, a very successful day, and I felt very proud to be a Reading Rocket on that day as I saw our staff come together and really support each other and learn together.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Okay. Ms. Baton?
Sure, yes. So as Director of Finance and Operations, I try to be out in the schools as much as possible, particularly now as we're entering our budget development cycle. I like and need to see teaching and learning in action. I'd like to speak with our teachers and understand what their days are like, our students, what their needs are, our cafeteria workers and our custodians. So over the past 2 weeks, I've been increasing the amount of time that I've been speaking with our staff and going out and visiting schools. I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've been involved in and the people who have totally impressed me as I've gone out and visited. So at Parker, I was able to spend a couple of hours on Halloween there, and it was a phenomenal experience. And I spoke with Doug Gibbs, who's a new PE teacher there, who I wish I could bottle his enthusiasm. He is such a positive and strong influence for students. He's a brand new teacher. Robin Farazani, our library media specialist at Parker, had a very thoughtful conversation with her, and I so appreciated the way that she set up her spaces for students in which they could learn. There were small areas for small group discussion. There were groups of students meeting. There were single spaces, soft, cozy chairs so students could settle in and read. There was a lecture style area for more of a direct instruction. And she shared with me the way in which she repurposed some of her furniture to make it, to provide more of a cafe-style learning. So it was really, really interesting being there. I met with Judy Barilak, the art teacher there, and she shared with me the art gallery of students' work entitled "When is an Apple Not an Apple?" We went on to meet with Mo and Chicky in the cafeteria, and I remarked about how not only how hardworking Mo and Chicky are, but how engaged they were with the students. The students seemed so happy and relaxed and were enjoying lunch with each other. During the week, I've also visited our preschoolers during lunchtime and right before nap time, and it was great speaking with them and hearing about their day. I often walk around the high school building, since our offices are right here, and speak with students, and they indulge me in my many questions, and they're incredibly respectful and patient with our conversations. And also, I've met recently with David Mosier, the department head of K-12 Fine Arts, and he and I met to review some financial plans for the Spring Arts Festival that he's planning, and it sounds like a phenomenal event and an enormously fine way to celebrate students' artwork, fine and performing artwork here in town. And then lastly, I wanted to thank 3 art teachers at Parker, Coolidge, and at the high school for forwarding to me a number of photographs of students' artwork, which I'm collecting to include in our financial and budget and enrollment and class size publications, in order to not only showcase their artwork, but help us to all remember that, you know, these numbers that we're looking through and sifting through really are, really represent students and students' needs and all of the services and ways that we support them. So I'm looking forward to sharing those reports with you and all of the student artwork embedded in those documents.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I can see it in your eyes. Carla.
Can I go back to Jen for a question, or maybe for us to know? In terms of nursing staff that we are bringing on, we're bringing on a float nurse with funds, right? And then we're bringing on an additional full-time nurse as well, or no? Just
No.
Yeah.
So as an update to that on the float nurse position, so Mary Juliana over the past month or so has been hosting interviews for the float nurse position. She's been looking for someone with experience and also who's licensed to step into the role right away. While she's doing that, she's been filling the gap with some substitute nurses and some part-time nurses. And as she's kind of worked through this, she realized some of the part-time staff she has some significant experience and have done a really good job filling in. So now she's thinking about her strategy of either moving in the full-time role or continuing to move with some of the part-time staff who's done a really good job and filled in. So that's where we stand right now, but she's happy to have that additional staffing that's been instrumental in supporting, particular schools and supporting testing district-wide.
I guess my question is more along the lines of, is that enough for her?
I think the answer right now, in this context that we're in, we could always use more support, and I think our nurses would be the first to tell you that. I think Mary was really appreciative to have some additional layer of support, but I think with the demands of just with test and stay right now, symptomatic testing, just the level of, of other student needs is significant. So I think, that's something we're looking forward as we move into the budget season, but I think right now there's a lot on our nurses, and I think I think it would be unreasonable for me to say that we're staffed in a way that is.
We have always have our eye on that.
Yeah, I agree.
Looking for more help.
I agree. Thank you for raising that.
Okay. Any further questions? Martha, have you been one to indulge Mrs. Baton as she walked around the hallways? Okay. Dr. Milczewski?
Well, good evening, Reading community. It's nice to see you all tonight. I'm going to share a couple of quick, unrelated updates, 4 things. First, as the community knows, our team here has been spending time in all of our schools through full-day school visits. We spend a lot of time in schools anyway, but we wanted to dedicate full days to try to develop a strong understanding of just what teaching and learning looks like in the building, just what the operational practices look like, and just to get a feel for the culture of the buildings. Those visits generally have started with a coffee hour with families in the morning, led to the day spending in all of the classrooms across the school. I think during the school visits, we've been to almost every class in every school, obviously except for the high school, and then closing with a staff meeting. We've now completed visits at 8 of the schools, and the last one that we'll be completing is to Wood End. I want to share, I think, some of the rationale behind this and what we've learned is that we realize that being in the schools, we've picked up on some of the things, the unique strengths and the unique challenges to specific school communities. And we also have picked up on some of those challenges and strengths that go sort of system-wide, either, across the elementary schools or across all of our schools. So we'll just thank all the families for engaging with us during those visits. We thank all the staff for engaging with us, and we also, most importantly, thank the students for engaging with us. That's been the best part of our visits. We have learned a ton that I think will, serve us well as we go into budget season and also sort of developing our strategic plan or revising our strategic plan in the spring. So just a huge thank you to the community and look forward to sharing out just our findings over the next few months. On a related note, we'd also just like to give a shout out to our school committee. If you don't know, each member of our school committee has visited at least one school with us this year, has spent time in classrooms, meeting with principals, meeting with teachers. I really appreciate this level of engagement from the committee to get to deeply know the schools and what's happening and to be engaged. And I particularly appreciate how the school committee members have been eager to interact with students when they're in the buildings as well. And I just think that has been well received by our staff, seeing the level of engagement and involvement and your desire to learn what's happening in the school community. And also, I think it's been, it's helpful for you as well to see just for your own eyes what some of the things happening in our schools. Look forward to continuing that practice, but I know with your busy schedules too, and work schedules, you've had to juggle things around, and I appreciate you on behalf of our district making that effort.
Can I just
please
add to that? I think it's fabulous, and I won't go into anything, but one of the things is I actually leave every one of those buildings with a spring in my step. I mean, it's just amazing what we're seeing people do. We haven't done that in the past, and thank you for that. And it's really brings a lot of things into context, talking about special ed programs and stuff. And it's been very helpful for me.
Thank you, Chuck. I think Chuck's visited all but 1 or 2 at this point, right? Yeah. All right, and if Chuck wants an extra bounce in his step, we can join us as a substitute teacher. That's our next segue here. But I would like to follow up about a week ago, we reached out to the community to share that one of the biggest challenges that we feel we face this year is staffing, particularly substitute staffing, and the ripple effect of not having those positions filled. Within hours of sharing that out through the video and the weekly announcement, we had probably a dozen families respond right away. Since then, we've had close to 25 families reach out to say, yes, I'm willing and eager to step into classrooms and help support in that way. So we're in the process of finishing the paperwork for all the 25 community members and caregivers who have been willing to step in and substitute teach. So what I've been told about Reading is that when you ask and there's a need, that people will fill it. And I've just been blown away that there was that need, which is overwhelming and challenging. Think about stepping into a classroom if you've never done it, to do that and put your foot forward for our district. So we really appreciate and thank all of those who were willing to step up in that way, and just know that that's the type of community that we have. When we ask, there's that type of support. So students, get ready for a new crop of substitute teachers who are eager to be in front of you. And then the last thing, just an update, more of a fun one. If you see any of my faces, any like marks of green or white, today I had my debut putting on a part of a skit with Zombie Prom with our RMHS Drama Club. So tomorrow in the weekly video update, you'll see my acting debut. Feel free to critique it, give me some critical feedback. But just want to put a plug in not only for Zombie Prom, but for the weekly update, and you'll see that tomorrow. So, and again, apologize for any green or white zombie on my face. But other than that, nice to see people here tonight, and look forward to conversations ahead.
Great, thank you. I'll just add on to Chuck real quick, and Dr. Milczewski, what you said, and I've heard from many, many teachers how much they've appreciated it as well. Having you all go to the schools, see them, not necessarily us, I'm sure they appreciate that too, but having the administration visit the schools, visit the classrooms, see what's happening. I've heard from many people that it's been well received, and they're very thankful that you've been out there. So I'll just say thank you as well for doing that and getting out there and seeing it. And there are many things that we need to continue to make progress in, and even just that relationship forming is a huge part of it. So I just want to thank you for that as well.
Now, I'll share one story about Tom at Coolidge Middle School. Is that a student challenged Tom to solve a challenging, tricky, I believe an Algebra 1 problem, and Tom, without hesitation, jumped in, solved it very well. But the last time I went to Coolidge, one of the students pulled me aside and said, next time you come back with your friends, we have a math competition for you, students versus staff. So I think they're ready to up the level of rigor next time too. But
There you go. I'm in.
bring it on, right?
Let's do it. All right, moving on to liaison and subcommittee reports. Sean, you have anything?
Yeah, not to pile on the school visits point, but I will pile on the school visits point. I had the opportunity to join the admin team at Parker last week on Friday before Halloween. It was the first time I'd been in a middle school classroom since I finished middle school, so, north of 25 years, which was great. And I'm not sure I knew what to expect going in on a Friday, with most of the kids wearing costumes, and things had the potential to go off the rails, I would say, on a day like that, if I remember middle school properly. And I would say, I think we visited maybe 6 or 7 classrooms together, and without exception, the level of engagement from the students, the pride that they had in showing off their work and what they were learning and what they were working on together, in most cases very collaboratively, was really encouraging. So, as Chuck said, you can't help but leave that with a spring in your step, and it provides a lot of great context for the work that we're all trying to do here. So I'll echo everybody's thanks for that opportunity. The only other liaison report, FinCom, the sort of latest iteration of the financial forum was, I've lost track of space and time, was last Wednesday?
20th.
Yeah, 2 Wednesdays ago. It was the first look that we got at free cash and sort of the town's overall budget position going into the FY23 budget season. The takeaway is that we're in a very good position from a budget perspective. We're in a very good position from a free cash perspective. Strong conservative budgeting principles over the last number of years have certainly driven that, as well as obviously some of the growth in town. So FinCom was able to recommend a pretty significant free cash usage in next year's budget, which will provide some latitude in the budgeting season coming up, which is great. The other sort of main topic of discussion there was around ARPA funds and the use of the ARPA funds. I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, so I won't belabor that point now, but FinCom's put together a very sort of thoughtful approach to how to address as a community the use of those ARPA funds that the town's entitled to. So very good discussion there as well. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Chuck?
So we had a coalition meeting last week. It was more of a general meeting. There wasn't like the previous one was about the YRBS and the annual meeting. This was more of the director's report, and she talked about their posting of the public safety position, the new health director position, and thank the coalition office for some grant funding that they got. And then Dr. Hardy touched on it. They're kind of now figuring out based on the results of the YRBS what the next steps are. So I know Eric is meeting with the staff now to do that. So was that meeting.
Great, thank you. Carla?
Thanks, Tom. We had a permanent building meeting on Monday, and like I said, we talked about, Joe Huggins gave an update about some of the projects going on in the district. We talked about the MSTA senior study phase, and that will begin in that hopefully anytime between December to March. So fingers crossed that we will come out of that with some kind of funding. We talked about closing out of the security project, or almost at that point, which is fabulous to hear. And then we talked about the Parker Middle School roof design that is going to be put out for bid over the winter. Turf 2, it's being designed right now. Construction should happen between April and August.
Stadium turf 2 is done.
Sorry, turf 1.
Turf one.
And then we have a police station as well. That's when the foundations are going up the middle of the winter. There was a bylaw committee meeting that night as well. They had problems, we had problems, I had problems getting Zoom started. I was on waiting for like 20 minutes, and I guess I got half an hour into it when they got that result. So we did have a meeting, I was not present.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron?
Sure. I didn't report on the policy subcommittee last time. So the policy subcommittee met on October 8th. We invited Kevin Tracy, Linda Williams, and Sarah Hardy to our meeting because we were talking about graduation requirements, which we will be talking about more tonight. Then the policy subcommittee subsequently met on October 28th. Basically just to approve those edits and move them forward so that the committee could review the changes tonight. We will next be meeting on November 18th in anticipation of discussing policy JICH, which is the substance abuse policy. We had done some edits to it as a committee and sent it to Erica McNamara of the coalition to look at it. She was also going to talk to Tom and I think Tom Zaya,
yep.
and
Kevin, yep.
To go over that. So we'll have that back by the 18th and then hopefully be able to move it forward to the committee for our December meeting.
Great, thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, so on October 26th, RCTV had their annual meeting followed by a quick board meeting to approve the budget. At the meeting, the board announced the 2021 scholarship award, which was given to Luke Backer, who is a longtime participant in the RCTV student classes, starting at about age 10, and more recently has been an intern there for the past several years. He graduated in June 2021. And they also showed a video of highlights from 2021 from various community events, which Luke actually put together, so it's nice to see students who've been with them for a long time and kind of work that they can do. And there was also an ice cream social. It was a bring your own ice cream social. So next year, all the kids to be on there. The next meeting is on November 16th.
Great, thank you. Carla took my MSBA update, but I'll just put a little bit more to that. We had a chance to meet with them on the 18th of October, in the morning over Zoom, to just kind of talk through our petition, what we're looking for, why we're looking for it, what it means from a district perspective as well, how our programs play into that from a special education perspective, how potentially full-day kindergarten plays into that, how preschool plays into that, and the status and safety and physical plant of Killam itself as well. We talked a little bit about, a temporary plan in terms of building on the back lot, so we wouldn't have to displace students in the process, and things along those lines. And then they came and visited on the 20th of October to walk through Killam and take notes and take pictures and see what the physical plant looked like. So that was their process. As Carla mentioned, they'll tell us more about whether we make it to the next phase, or like they politely say, you should reapply for the next year. Sometime between December and March. So we'll know at that point when and how to engage the community in other conversations. We'll know at that point if we need to go to town meeting in April for any sort of money requests from a study perspective or anything else along those lines. Maybe November, we will have enough time to do it in November instead of April if we needed to. So it depends on when they notify us and how things work. So we have 270 days after they notify us, and at that point, that's when the clock starts, at which point we have to secure the funding for the initial study and design phase, and then we go from there. So there will be a lot of public conversation as we move forward with that. That is in no way, shape, or form finalized or set in stone or anything else along those lines. I think I'm speaking on behalf of us that we want public communication, but please tell me if anybody thinks I'm wrong. As we look to design or think about what the replacement for Killam might be, or the augmentation of Killam if that's the case. So, okay.
One of the things that I was surprised to hear, I just wasn't aware that there are 13 communities in this phase and that we only accept 4 in the program at this point.
I thought it was more than that, like 52, and they accepted 13 or something like that. It was, there's 52 that they've accepted this phase. There's a lot of there were more than that from an application perspective, and only a 13 or something like that made it move forward. I think were the numbers I had. I unfortunately have the notes on my other computer, so I couldn't. 11, actually. Yeah, maybe.
Susan has it.
I have some notes here that 15 were invited into this phase, and there were 11 last year. So they're interviewing a few more districts this year, evaluating their SOIs.
Yeah. So there's some fun there to try and figure out what exactly happening and when and all that kind of fun stuff. So, but it sounds like we won't know for sure. We won't know more until sometime, if we're lucky, or if everything goes according. They have 2 board meetings, and they need to notify people right before those board meetings. If they're ready and if all their ducks in a row, we'll know sometime in middle of December. If they're not ready for that board meeting, we'll know sometime in the middle of March. So it's all aligned to their board meetings and what they need to tell people. Okay? And that's it for me from that perspective. Okay. So now let's move on. The next topic on the agenda is the Reading and Writing Advisory Committee, which I guess technically we have to take from the table again. Even though I put on the agenda, Sean? What do you think?
It depends on if you want to have the broader discussion first or not, I suppose. We can take it from the table.
Let's just take it from the table so we can.
Before we move on, I was just telling Samantha she doesn't need to make a grand.
Samantha, yes, you're welcome to stay, you're welcome to go. We will take no offense either way. So it's up to you.
You have a very important fabulous test tomorrow night.
Go study.
Thank you, have a nice night.
Thank you.
Take it.
Thank you.
Move to take from the table the motion pertaining to the Reading and Writing Advisory Committee.
Seconded by Chuck. Tabling, removing the table is not debatable, I don't think, so let's just vote on that. All in favor of taking from the table? All opposed? And the table, removing from the table is 6-0 pass. Seconded by Chuck. Okay, so Dr. Milczewski gets things plugged in and ready to go.
We didn't want to be PDF form. There's a way we can. So this is
Change the printer. Okay, there you go. Slide it over. As he gets that ready, a little bit of background from our last conversation. So, we obviously had the conversation back in September as the beginning of this conversation. Based upon various conversations that led up to it, there were some concerns raised in that conversation with regards to roles and responsibilities of the school committee, whether we should or shouldn't be involved in certain things. And then there's been some conversations since then. Sean, Tom and I had a few conversations. I think Tom and the staff have had quite a few different conversations as well. And so, in the effort of looking at a kind of a compromise type solution, Dr. Milczewski, you have a proposal that you want us to walk through, and then we'll talk. We're kind of taking things out of order from the agenda, from the meeting, but in order from an agenda perspective. We'll talk through roles and responsibilities after we talk through the potential compromise solution. So
Great.
I'll leave it to you and go from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom, and also appreciate you teeing up with the context. That's helped out there. So thank you, everyone, for we've heard a lot over the past month or so on this topic around reading and writing. So we've had as you know, this is sort of things we discussed at school committee meetings before, and since then we've met with people, we've read emails, we've had conversations about this work. It's magic click. It's okay. Do you just want to? We just want to have someone click through. If I can stand there, is it okay?
I don't think they'll hear you.
Or it's probably just me again.
No, it's supposed to be in there.
Oh, we can plug it in. I'm trying to showcase Rob's skills.
Tech skills on the fly, right?
On the fly, no pressure. Wow. Thank you. Rob, you're good.
Look at
Thank
that.
you. In the moment. Thank you. Our IT department is great. So thank you, Rob. So we want to take a little bit of time before we dive into just what we think this work would look like. Take a little bit of time to ground it. What are some of the things that we heard from people, and also what are some of the things that we think is important in this work. First thing we've heard loud and clear is a level of urgency, right? And that's a level of urgency that I think for us, it excites us. We feel excited that there's a community that feels so passionately that we can do more for our students and do more work to make sure that our students are leaving, RPS as competent and confident readers. And I think we have realized we have a lot of work to do in that area, and we've appreciated the passion with which the community has approached this, right? We've also heard a lot around the community's desire for us to ground what we're doing in research and best practices, right? To make sure that what we're doing isn't built off a hunch, but instead knowing this is where the research says we need to do to move the work forward. Another thing we've heard from the community is that they want this work to be inclusive. We appreciate the work that the CPAC, along with Dr. Stiles, Alison Wright did to help move some of this work forward. And now we want to make sure this work impacts all of our students, right? Outside of students with disabilities, right? We want to make sure it impacts all students across our district. Another thing that came through, I think probably loudest, was there needs to be accountability in this work. There's a lot of people who've shared that in the past, they feel that this work hasn't had that same level of urgency, and they feel that that needs to happen now, right? And that's the accountability that we want as a team too, because we feel that there's no more important work for us than making sure we're held accountable to student outcomes and students being where they need to academically. And that accountability, came through in your comments loud and clear. I would say just as strong as accountability came transparency. People wanted to know what we're thinking about, what this work would look like, why we're doing things, why we're making adjustments, what data supports those adjustments that we would make, so being transparent in the work that we were doing. And this last piece, sorry, there's a second delay, so that's why I'll give you a little teaser when I click, is this passion. And I want to emphasize this point too. We know that the conversation over the past month has been situated on, should it sit here or should it sit here, right? And I think both people and both camps, I would say, have said, this work really matters, right? And I think that passion is what has been, again, what's most important to us and what we want to build on. So a couple of things of what we think is what we believe in this is we believe there's actually a lot of commonality in what people had shared. I don't want to get hung up in sort of, the piece of sort of where this work would sit as much as I want to get caught up in what are the goals for our work and let's move this work forward. Another thing that we believe is that there is we need to come to a shared understanding of what is some of the research and best practice saying in this work, and we also need to come to a shared understanding of what's happening in our schools. There was a lot of questions that popped up about, well, what exactly is happening literacy instruction in schools? I've had a lot of people reach out saying, well, you need to teach phonics. Well, we agree, right, and we do teach phonics, right? I've actually seen some really good phonics instruction sort of in classrooms. With that said, we need to come to a shared understanding of what does literacy practices look like across our district, and also why do we feel there's this urgency to also move things forward. Third, we felt that trust really matters. We've heard from a lot of families personal experiences that were really difficult to hear as a professional and as a parent. We've heard parents and caregivers share ways that they feel like the system has not done right by their child, and they feel that their child is not in a place where they should be in terms of literacy, and that we have a lot of work to do to build back that trust. But we believe that building back that trust is essential for us to move forward as a community. We also strongly believe in collaboration between stakeholders. We've had a lot of people ask us, why do parents need to be at the table for this, right? And we believe that the best work is going to happen when there's partnership between our educators and our families and caregivers. And we feel like that's where the best work is going to happen. We have some parents with some amazing lived experience who the stories and the testimonies and their knowledge of their own students and what would move their students forward, what worked, what doesn't work for their students, is tremendous, and we want to use that, right? And we also have educators at the same time who this is their wheelhouse, this is their passion, this is their expertise. And we have to find ways to bring those stakeholder groups together to move forward as a united front. And then I think lastly is we believe that this work aligns with the ongoing work that is happening right now and that we believe needs to happen. I've said this a couple of times, regardless of whether or not this sort of popped up, for us to discuss at the school committee, whether or not where this work sits, this is work we believe in, this is work we are going to do, and this is work that we think needs to happen. So which brings us to sort of where do we think this work sits? Well, we've talked through as a committee different possibilities for where this work is, right? And I genuinely see pros and cons to, each spot of where this work could sit. Tonight, I'm going to put forward a proposal with our team of having this work sit under the administration for a couple of reasons, right? First, around the idea of trust. We feel like we have a lot of work to do to build trust with families and with educators, and we feel like sometimes the best way to build that work, to build that trust, is to build that up with people. We don't want this to be the impression that this is something that's coming sort of top down from school committee. Right? We want it to know, which is not the case. We want to believe that it's built up from all of us together, from administration, from staff, from families together. And we think that this may signal that for us. We think, again, it's already aligned to what we're doing. It's already aligned to the work that we're trying to analyze sort of our current practice and where we need to go. And we're looking for partnership and collaboration in this area. And then lastly, we also think by putting under administration would allow us to increase access in terms of participation of voting and things like that, where there's no restrictions around sort of residency and pieces like that. Now, I share that to say, again, I think there's pros and cons to no matter where this work could sit. And I think it's easy for us to get caught up on sort of where should it sit or where does it best sit. I think the most important thing for us to do is to come together and say we all believe in this work and find a way to get unity in moving the work forward. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what would this look like for us if we were to put this under the administration. So I'll turn it over. We have 4 sort of major goals to talk through, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. So we have identified some goal areas which would focus the work of the committee. The first goal area centers on how the committee would work collaboratively with administration. So the committee would act as a communication and planning partner with administration as we consider initiatives, research, resources, presentations. So as an example, what that might look like is that as data becomes available about the work happening here in Reading, the committee would work to help prepare administration, as administration prepares presentations, to analyze and strengthen those presentations for clarity before they are presented to school committee or the community at large. The second area that would be a goal of this committee is to focus really on the work that would support and engage us around best practices and research. And so this means that the committee would identify areas of strength and areas that need further improvement. And we, by investigating additional supports, and we would be looking at the committee doing this being rooted in best practices, so such as Crafting Minds, Graphic Organizer for assessment results, eCorey, and Scarborough's Reading Rope. Some of the supports and resources that the committee might investigate are maybe visiting other districts that have promising practices. We would be looking for promising practices both in general education and across all special education settings. Maybe also looking at curating resources such as podcasts, books, conferences, etc. Also, research and identifying curriculum tools and materials. And then finally, an area we thought that the committee would work on is identifying consultants and other implementation resources that would support this work. So basically, this goal is focused on information gathering related to best practices in research.
Another area we would really like to continue to work on is our partnerships with family. As you've heard tonight, we're doing another training on November 30th. And we really want to continue that work to really organize and share helpful information with caregivers and families. Part of this would be to really gather data around the behaviors and routines where families want support and resources so that we can make sure we are addressing the needs of all families and all students. And that really what we would like to do is continue the trainings we're doing and continue to put supports together like the book list and podcasts that we've already created and expanding that. Also, the dyslexia screening PowerPoints that are available on the website, and really making sure that we are meeting the needs of everyone and working together transparently to improve together as a whole community. And our fourth bullet point is so important to all of us because there is such a shared sense of urgency that we need to help the community move forward together and really look at our best practices for all students, and that means across all settings. Doesn't matter what the disability type is, it doesn't matter if the students are in a substantially separate classroom or not, the student's income status, or their primary language. We really mean all means all in our collective experience of improving reading for all students in Reading. And so we have a lot of additional considerations that we want to make sure we are thinking about, and especially around the composition of this committee. So we're really looking for people who are open-minded, passionate, collaborative, and have some time to invest in this work. We haven't necessarily set a number of people because what we're hoping is that this is an inclusive committee, and we are looking to probably form subcommittees that can really delve into the different areas that we've discussed and then report back. We know that this is urgent work, and we are really trying to have something starting in late November, early December, and we'd really like to ground that first meeting in developing a shared understanding and doing some work together as a committee around what are the best practices rooted in the latest research, and what are our practices already happening in Reading, because we feel very strongly that if we're a committee that's going to work together openly and honestly, we all need to begin with the same knowledge base and determine how we're going to move forward together. So that's where we believe the work of the committee is going to start, to have this common knowledge and training, and then break off into subcommittees and really define timelines and very methodical and thoughtful accountability measures. Accountability to teachers, to families, to the school committee, and to the community, because that's critical in order to build trust and work proactively. We need to be giving all of the stakeholders regular updates of where the committee is at, what we are doing, and what we are thinking to move forward. So those are some of the additional considerations we are focusing on to really ensure that we are addressing the needs of all learners in Reading to ensure that they have all of the proper skills to move forward in terms of reading and literacy.
So as we, before we open up to the questions and thoughts too, this is work that we're really excited about, and we're really excited about the partnership ahead, and I think I'm excited about the potential of where the collaborative efforts are going to lead for our staff, for our students, and for our families. So thank you for all of the thoughts, the feedback, and despite the difference of opinions of where things can sit, I think everyone is, from what I've heard, excited to move this work forward. So thank you.
Okay, any questions from the committee? Any thoughts?
Thank you. Very good presentation. I just had a question, this maybe for Jen, on the composition. You said basically you take all comers. Who would that be? Teachers or parents?
Absolutely. So we most certainly want, as Dr. Milichewski said at the beginning, we have staff that are very passionate about this, and this is really their work, and we want them involved and to have a voice and a seat at the table. We also know that we have families who have lived experiences that want to ensure that all students have access to this and that no one is forgotten or marginalized, and so we want to make sure we open up a seat for them. And we also feel strongly that there may be community partners that would like to join us as well. We actually were talking about somebody from the local library joining us, because how important would it be that all of our resources are there and available, and we're partnering with opportunities. So what we didn't want to do was limit it and maybe miss somebody who was really invested and engaged. So our hope is, when we move forward with this, is to advertise it knowing that it's going to have to require a time commitment from the staff and families and community partners, and if they're willing to engage in that work with us over the next few months.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Aaron?
So thank you for this. If this were to be, I don't even know if we vote on it, if it's under the administration, but
We don't.
how will you be letting families know what is happening? And how can they volunteer if they want to be part of it? Like, how will all of that unfold?
That's a great question, and something we are really still working out. I think we would use some of our natural updates with the videos and the outreach and the communication, but we'd also be looking at the building level to make sure that we are asking people as well, and then doing some outreach to the community. And like I said, our goal would be late November, early December, the work would be beginning, so we'd be reaching out to people fairly quickly.
So Jen outlined sort of the what that would look like to get the committee together. And I think we've talked a little bit about, so what does it look like after that for updates, accountability mechanisms, and I think the people that we're hoping to bring to the table can help us form out how do we communicate and update the community on what's happening. And we're hoping to bring people on the team who want us to be accountable in this work. We're guessing the people who are going to be joining the committee believe in accountability and will help us to define what those accountability metrics should be. So I think Jen's point about sort of that initial phase, but then we like to build the rest with the committee to figure out around communication and accountability.
So, while we've had discussions on some of this is the first I've seen of this presentation. So first, thank you for taking the time to put it together, synthesize all of the feedback people are providing you, providing us, really, collectively. Thank you for the urgency that you're demonstrating. I think timelines is something that I don't think it's urgent enough, frankly, but I'd like to figure out how we can make that happen and kind of move that forward. I think you mentioned transparency in the earlier portion of it, and I think this committee needs to commit to transparent, open meetings, regardless of whether it's with us or with you. We've talked about that a little bit as well, and that's one of the fears I've heard. It's one of the constant historical challenges that we've had, frankly, is that issue, which is one of the reasons why it was proposed initially in the way it was proposed, is to address that challenge. If we could step back through, I don't know, Tom, if you go backwards, I think there's, so.
Do you want that?
That's, number one, I think aligns to one of the topics we discussed in the previous case, in the previous charge, and that is, I think the first question is where are we getting the data, right? Have we built the process to gather the data, or is this also going to be helping to think about what data are we gathering and things along those lines, right? Mm-hmm. I've heard you say in multiple occasions that we don't quite have the systems and structures in place yet that we want in that place, so analyzing data that doesn't exist means you're not doing anything. So what are we doing about making sure that we have the right data, that we're capturing the right information? Maybe it's the dyslexia screener, but that doesn't give us a ton of data because it's a screener. You know, is it DIBELS 8 data? Is it MCAS data? What are we talking about when we talk about that, and what analysis is going on here?
I'll start with the sort of open meeting question, and then I think I'll shift it to Jen or Sarah for the second part too. So we've talked a lot about that piece with the open meeting. And I think we know that that was one of the things that would be different between putting it under school committee and putting it under administration. So the way I see it is I think there was real value in making meetings public and transparent, right? And I also think there's real value sometimes in having meetings that are, not. And let me give an example. I think sometimes there's things when people are going to be more comfortable disagreeing or not having answers to things or engaging in difficult conversations when they don't publicly have to sort of show vulnerability or potentially show weakness in an area or feel like they have to fight for a potential position, right? If they're not on camera and they can do that in a group. Now, at the same time, we also know that we want people to be able to hear what the work is and how we're moving things forward. I would see it under administration of a combination. I think there's some types of meetings that people should work through things sort of as a smaller group to get work done. That would, I think, allow for less sort of a public view and scrutiny on exchange of ideas and possibilities. And I also think there's some of the meetings that need to be, more public and open where people can see the work that's happening. And there's more collaborative sharing of ideas. So I don't think one structure or the other is what we were thinking. We think it really depends on what sort of the task that we're working through, because I think there's value and benefits in both, and so I think it's more of that hybrid sort of structure, if that makes sense.
So if I could extrapolate that a little bit based upon what Jen said earlier, is it possible you're thinking the subcommittees of the committee meetings might be more private, but the committee meetings themselves might be more public?
I think without getting too far down the road, yes, that's sort of what we've thought through, is a lot of the work is going to happen, but then a lot of the sharing out, the exchanging of ideas, the feedback on things would happen more sort of in the larger group. But again, that's just our initial idea we've been throwing around, is having those subcommittees to work on certain parts of this work and then be able to bring that back to the larger group. And that would be more the public sort of forward-facing idea. How we're seeing it, again, we don't want to be necessarily held to that. That was our brainstorm today. We're open to thoughts and feedback, but we saw that similarly.
You want to tackle the data side now too?
Yeah, so I think you asked a couple of questions, and I guess my initial response would be yes. Yes to all of that, because I think which is one of the reasons for us subcommittees were so important. Because there's a piece of this, if you look at the last section where it's prior to presenting to the full school committee, we want feedback. We want to know, what, that doesn't make sense. Or, geez, there seems to be holes here. Could we get more information? So that's one version of how we're hoping that this committee can help us learn and grow. The other piece is to really dive into, what are we missing? These are the data points we have. It tells us something. And what else do we need? Which then ties into some of the other pieces on the next slide. Do we need to go to visits of other communities that are doing this, doing it well? What are they doing, and how are they using data to drive their decisions? And what's that feedback mechanism in terms of intervention, response, looking at the data again, making sure we've got it right? And so really, we're seeing it as multiple roles in terms of how we approach it with data, and then also how we approach each of these pieces, because it's not just about creating a library of resources, it's about creating a library of resources that is meaningful and engaging and is going to further our work together as we partner with all of our educators and our families in the community. And some of the other pieces we were thinking about doing, which I know I'm going beyond your data question in a sense of student data, but we're also looking for data in terms of program and effectiveness and time on task and cost. And how does all of that play into making some really important decisions that, if we think about what the role of the committee was to share with administration, so then we could make additional instructional recommendations. So that's really how we see data playing into it all together.
Okay, so building on this one, the other question I had as I was going through this and thinking about it as you were talking was the impact, and the reason why we put the original chart in the way we did is there's impact there to budget policy goals for the following year, right? Is there something that could be added to this that talks about either this or some other slide, or even goal number 5, impact to budget planning. And we're kind of late in the process for this year, but we need to think about it anyway, that this leads to, right? If you're going to research and identify curriculum tools and materials, that potentially means you're going to purchase new ones. But that means that there's going to be training that goes with that. That means there's going to be PD that goes with that. That means there can be other things. So you're not just doing it to research it, you're doing it to potentially purchase something. So,
Yeah.
and consultants for implementation to make sure we implement it right. So there's cost there that goes into the budget category. Is there a report out that comes with this that we should think about, or is that a goal number 5 potentially?
So we did have it at Great Minds, because that was actually our last bullet point. We were trying to synthesize it a little bit down, but we did think about the costs and really the pros and cons, the cost and the training needs of each program. And so we were anticipating that that's a piece of this, because we also need to figure out, is this a 1-year rollout, a 3-year rollout, a 5-year rollout? Is there no rollout in terms of curriculum change, but it's around training, and what does that look like, and what are the implications? So we were embedding all of your points around the cost and training needs into this one that's rooted in best practice and all of that.
So you go to 3 and 4, Tom. I apologize, Dr. Milczewski. So that's caregivers and families. What's 4? Help us move forward. So this isn't if we implement it in this fashion, this isn't a school committee, so we would have no purview over it necessarily. But it comes back from the previous question at some point in time to us. Is there a plan to report out? Is there a plan to, come back and say, well, this is what we found, this is what we need to move on, these are the weaknesses we have, these are the strengths we have, this is the action to execute that, and is that, going back to that urgent word at the beginning,
Yes.
is that something that we can put a time box to, that we're looking at it by the end of the next school year? Is that, something else along those lines that we can think about?
Absolutely, and I think these are all really important and critical questions around, again, the transparency, the urgency, the accountability, and that's why we really put in there the accountability measures, that we really need to make sure we are reporting back, that we are getting feedback, we are sharing what we are learning, and we are adjusting so that we can continue to build that trust and work proactively as we provide regular updates. We didn't feel like we were in the position today to make a recommendation of, by this time, the work's going to be done, not knowing really the people that are going to be on the committee, the scope of the work in terms of subcommittees, but we were really committing to making sure this is done. It is beginning by the end of this month, the very beginning of next month, and that we then form, as Dr. Milczewski said, an action plan with all of those steps and report back to all of you, to the teachers and the families.
Yeah, just to build on that, this may not be done for a long, long time, right? I'm not trying to say that it's done by the end of June, I'm just trying to say there's a target, there's an aggressive going towards something.
Yep.
To have a plan to work, to have a plan to start working a plan.
Yes.
Or for lack of a better way to say it.
I think on that, we talked through that, should we have that date and target, and I think what we decided was that we thought it made more sense to have the committee, once comprised, comes up with all the accountability mechanisms, and my guess of given the people who want to jump on this work will have some good ideas to have some urgency and some accountability on that, so I think that was something we wanted to build with the committee, but also know that we are seeing it similarly, that there should at least be sort of an end of the year report on what's happening and progress updates along the way. But I would rather let the committee sort of decide that, and I don't think we're going to have a problem with accountability with who we have on the committee to help us build that out together. Yeah,
a comment, maybe comment's really more than a question. that page of other considerations, particularly, you don't, oh, it's good, yeah, it's fine. Particularly with respect to timelines and accountability mechanisms, not to belabor the point, but these are really the things that take this from a nice idea with good intentions to something with teeth that's going to move the needle. So I share Tom's observation around sort of feeling some urgency around, that being sort of the first piece of progress that the committee makes. And it's not accountability to us under this format, but it's accountability to the community and the people involved in the effort. So that's really important. I think the other thing I would say is just around the budget piece, recognizing that we are not likely to sort of identify a lot of major changes from a tools and curriculum perspective or a training perspective between now and, say, January, but we might between January and September. I wonder if it makes sense for us to think about almost placeholder funding in anticipation of, there's going to be something that we'll identify we want to invest in during the next academic year, or maybe even prior to the next academic year, and how do we make sure that we've sort of set something aside so that we can not put ourselves in a place where we've sort of identified something that we think will move the needle and are in a position where we have to sort of bend over backwards to try and get it funded. So it might make sense for us, and it might create sort of just a real sort of push to make progress if we've sort of already earmarked some funding for that. So just a thought.
Good ideas.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the open meeting aspect that came up, and I guess from based on what you said the composition is going to be, to me, that when you're going to listen to anybody that wants to join the committee, that I think satisfies an open meeting. We're not picking a committee and turning people away. And I guess I do get a little concerned that somebody who didn't raise their hand for that committee is going to show up at meetings and jump into conversations where they haven't been participating, and put those committee members, especially maybe teachers, feeling uncomfortable. So that's just a quick thought I had about that. I know you were going to go back and look at that further. That's kind of where I was thinking. I really think by making it available to anybody that wants to sign up, we do satisfy some of that.
And I think, and I agree with you, that was a way to satisfy. I think we're not necessarily able to commit to say, yes, everyone who wants to be involved can sort of be involved. We have no idea what the scope of interest would be, right? I think we originally had it charted out a team of 12, and we had it broken down with a certain amount of educators, a certain amount of, families and caregivers. And I think what we realized is that there's a lot of people who want to be engaged in this work, and we'd rather get more people around this table and have these conversations. And having the subcommittees may be a way for us to move the work forward as a bigger group. But if we were to have interest from, 80, 90 people, we would have to be thoughtful about how do we structure that, right? So I don't know if we can commit at this point to saying everyone who wants to be interested can sort of, or is interested can join. But we are going to try to think of ways that we can build it to be as inclusive as possible. If the committee would prefer for us to, come back with sort of something more set in stone, we can certainly do that. Again, this is just sort of our brainstorm on how we were seeing composition.
Additionally, I think we were talking about a big piece of this for us is making sure this committee isn't the only voice, that part of this is reaching out to parents, doing surveys, finding what they need, talking to teachers, visiting classrooms, making sure we're as inclusive as possible. So there are a lot of people committed to this work, and this committee has been very generous with me in particular and the department, and figuring out how we move the needle in special education over the past 2 years, and how do we continue it to be that inclusive. And I just wanted to take a second just to thank you and to highlight as we talk about the urgency. We're seeing that. We've had Dr. Orkin and Crafting Minds come in and train every special education teacher every school psychologist, every team chair, every literacy specialist on how to assess students and what are the instructional implications. All elementary special ed teachers are going to be trained in RAVO by the end of November. You were extraordinarily generous last year as we looked at the budget to fund the literacy position that we are making great use out of. And so our goal is to really continue that work with all the stakeholders and knowing that some of those people are extremely invested and can't commit the time to be on this committee. So part of the committee's charge is to make sure we hear the voices of everyone to continue this work.
Sarah?
Just a few notes that I've been jotting down when you guys have been talking, so thank you for pulling this together. A couple of things I was thinking about, so I think having it under the administration, I think, again, pros and cons, I think it gives the district staff more ownership and investment in the process, which is a wonderful thing. On the con side, I think it does minimize a little bit the role of the school committee and the support we could offer to help move the work forward. So I think that's definitely something to think through. What you presented tonight is pretty high level and specific, which I think, you know, if you're looking for the committee to help shape those goals, et cetera, I think that's a really positive thing. But I think it also, you know, I think if we could set that goal and vision for the year, what that would look like to help focus and kind of demonstrate the commitment and urgency to the work, that might help firm up kind of what this really looks like. Being kind of open and inclusive quickly becomes unwieldy and lacking focus. So there's that balance of welcoming people to the table, but not meandering through the year, so that we actually have objectives that we're trying to set. So whether that's setting annual SMART objectives to keep us accountable, or what that looks like. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about what your initial thoughts are around, you know, who would be leading this group. Is there, you know, kind of, you know, we had proposed when it was through the school committee, having a chair who would move forward. So what does that look like in the administrative model?
So I think first, this is great feedback from the whole committee here to help us think through just how do we move this work forward. I think, Sarah, a couple things that you share that resonate with me. I think we talked a lot about, like tonight, do we come with a more fleshed out idea of the specifics and the ins and outs of what this would look like? And I think there'd be value in that to help set the stage for what's going to happen. The reason why we shifted to this was we were hopeful that if we give some broad goals and then get the stakeholders around the table, they will help us map out what this work's going to look like moving forward. And if we truly want to build this collaboratively, it makes sense to like flesh that out more when we have teachers and parents in the room with us. So I think it was an intentional decision to be a little bit broad, but I definitely get the drawbacks on that. I love your idea about setting objectives. I think similar to the way we ask staff to do consistently. I think that would just sort of progress monitoring, I think would be really helpful. So I like that feedback. And we haven't talked a ton about, besides us sort of three helping to shape and facilitate at least the initial meeting. But after that, I mean, we have people who would be confident and competent to facilitate subcommittees outside of us too, right, with support from us too. So I don't think we're trying to restrict the leadership roles of this just to us three, but I think all three of us would play a very big part in shaping and guiding the work of the group. I don't know if you have more specifics on that you want us to.
No, I mean, I guess I think just trying to get a sense of what this really looks like and how we can respond to the urgency piece of it. Change is hard. So without clear leadership and goals, we can kind of just do more of this, which feels like more of the same, to be honest. I think we need to show that, and we're all willing to come together to move change forward. And how can we do that by setting even if it's just putting out that objective and having a clear structure that we're planning to utilize to move the work forward. I think that will help shape it and provide the direction, and then have people from all parts of the community help move it forward.
Good feedback, thank you.
I'll just build on that a little bit and going to the urgency point as well. I don't think we're necessarily saying you should put all the goals now, but maybe your first goal needs to be, we're going to define the goals by end of February, whatever they are. I mean, I'm just something realistic that says we're going to get the group together and define the goals and the subcommittees and the action items that we know of. There may be more to come, that we know of by a certain point in time. Otherwise, there is an amorphous blob here, right? That there's, how are we going to go? How are we going to do it? You know, the urgency comes with goals, with time-bound goals. That's the T part of it, right? We have to make sure that that somehow continues to happen. And that would be a national report-out period as well, from a public report-out perspective. Maybe here, maybe elsewhere, maybe in one of a special 10-minute update at the end of the week or something else like that, that says what you're doing and what the goals are and how it's moving forward and whatnot. But the first goal is obviously, is usually the most important because it sets the standard for everything to come forward. And maybe that first goal just needs to be, we will have these goals by X period of time. We will have 3 goals for the committee by the end of February 2022. Something. Try to be realistic. I would love to say by December 15th, 2021, but I don't think that's realistic necessarily. So the R part of SMART falls apart. But I want to stress the urgency as well because this does have a lot of other potential. You know, I think stepping back a little bit, we've talked a lot about the fact of belief of what's possible, right? Whether that's at our offsite or other places, a lot of this ties to the belief of what's possible. And not the excuse of what has happened. So we have to make sure that that belief drives the work and drives it with a very positive intensity to move that in a very efficient and effective way. I share the concerns about an overly burdensome or overly large committee. I want different voices. I would want different voices at the table though, to make sure that we're, you know, thinking about it holistically. When you and I were talking, Dr. Milichewski, a little bit, the example I used was one of your examples from, you know, last year when you were having to do the whole planning for the town, and you had a couple of different voices that wanted people in the building the whole time, and that couldn't work, and how you worked it out. And sometimes you need those different voices in the room as well, and that's how you build, you know, understanding and collaboration. But I think we have to be very careful that we don't let this just drift and drift and drift.
I really appreciate the idea of even the first step is setting that we're going to have goals by this time, or the committee will collectively define these goals by this time. I think, as you sort of note, we didn't want to get too far ahead and define for the committee what we do, but I think having something in place to say even, you know, our goal, the committee needs to have 3 goals by this time and attach sort of time-bound, measurable things to all of those as well. So I think there's a way that we can give a little bit more specificity here to give it some more urgency and some more accountability, and also not, you know, compromise the ability for the committee to shape some of the work ahead and shape the goals as well. So I think that's work we can do. So thank you for that feedback.
I just want to acknowledge and thank you all for the amount of time and effort that has gone into getting us this far. And I think your presentation reflects that you genuinely heard what parents, what community members had to say. And I agree with you that some of it was quite painful. You know, there are students who our district has failed. So I'm excited to see what can come out of this committee, but I agree that, you know, it's part of it is going to be in the doing, and I think that the accountability, the transparency are huge with this one. You know, I think the stakes are high with this one. So I appreciate all of this, but I'll be eager to see sort of how things unfold.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Any questions or comments from anybody in the audience? Please step to the microphone. Can you step to the microphone, name and street?
I'm Melissa Davis, Longwood Road in Reading, and I did have something prepared to speak in regards to the reading advisory subcommittee, but I'm not sure. Are you guys going to discuss that next, or?
I would say this is sort of that discussion right now.
Okay.
If we accept this as a proposal, then the subcommittee under the committee would not happen because this would be the alternative. So now would be the time that you would want to say something else.
Okay. I just want to thank everyone, because I know, everyone has the best interest of students in mind. I get that. I'm speaking from a parent whose children have been affected greatly by the district, and I won't go there because I know there's lots of positive changes that are being made, and I'm very happy for that. But I come here not as a parent who's concerned about the future of my kids, but I'm here for those kids that don't have a voice, those kids that may be 1 or 2 right now, or 3, who are going to be those kids through K through 3, which is the prime time to learn. And before I read this, I just want to say I appreciate your recommendation for this committee, but I just feel like it's more of the same, and, without being disrespectful, the elephant in the room is the fact that it's not rocket science, no pun intended. It is reading science, and the data is out there, and we know what works. The problem is teachers, and they're great, our teachers are wonderful here, but they were not trained, they did not have coursework in college to teach reading. So we have a huge issue here because we have to deal in the long run with union contracts for training time. Are they going to be willing to participate in this if it's 3 o'clock? We've got a lot of politics involved that I think this would bring up, but aside from that, I'll read what I prepared. Over the past decade, RPS's state reading proficiency scores have declined. Decade, if not longer. In particular, as discussed during the last school committee meeting, the subgroups have disproportionately declined. They are lower than the state averages. Additionally, I'm sure the numbers of students achieving reading proficiency is skewed due to the socioeconomics of Reading and the ability for many caregivers to afford private tutors or the time to provide additional reading supports at home. There are a lot of students who don't have that opportunity, and they will not have that opportunity, and that's who I speak for right now to this committee. It is clear that we have a Tier 1 reading problem. I respect Dr. Tsai's willingness for SPED. She's doing a lot of work in that area, so is a literacy coach, but I'm here for all students. We cannot remediate our way out of a Tier 1 issue. It is not fair to our special education staff, our general education teachers, and more importantly, it isn't fair to our students in our town. Both RPS and the school committee have pledged to provide an equitable education for all students, not just those with caregivers who have the money or time to supplement their reading. Our MCAS scores show we are failing. That is the data we have. This is unacceptable. For years, district goals have included reducing the achievement gap without yielding any positive results. Our students deserve better. This is by no means an attack on teachers. Teachers not only need appropriate evidence-based curriculum, but they need resources, well thought out, planned resources that align with their union contracts. They need training. They need data-driven oversight that clearly has not been provided. Although key members of the administration have recently changed, the continued pattern of failing our students, especially those with the most obstacles to learning, requires facilitation by those that represent our town and students. That is school committee's role. That is each and every one of you, your roles. It's time to roll up your sleeve and put action where your words are. It is your job to make sure our tax dollars are getting spent on evidence-based materials aligned with the federal laws, properly implemented practices, and that all students are showing growth and acquisition of reading skills. The school committee absolutely needs to oversee a deep dive into our reading practices with particular attention paid to grades K through 3 and how we can align Tier 1 reading instruction with the science of reading. An advisory committee to school committee will allow this to occur in a transparent and collaborative way to include all stakeholders in a timely manner. It is the logical next step when considering the context of this issue and the previously noted history of RPS failing at this. I stand up here to say enough. Enough with passing this off to RPS. They have tried to figure this out. If they could have, they would have already. I do not believe anyone has maliciously prevented RPS from doing so, nor do I think maliciously they wouldn't try in the future to do their best. However, after a decade of coming back to our failed Tier 1 reading instructional practices that do not align with state and federal laws, it is time to get off the merry-go-round and try something new. Please vote for the Reading Advisory Committee as it is designed. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Are there any other points or questions or thoughts? Yes.
So my name is Carissa Brady. I'm on Charles Street. I have 2 kids in the Reading Public Schools. One's over at Parker in the LEAD program, and one is at Coolidge in the REACH and SOAR program. I'm still getting used to new terminology. So I've got a long history with Reading, especially from the reading perspective. Dyslexia, both my kids have severe dyslexia. And my question is, so I've been through a lot of iterations, fits and starts with the schools committee and CPAC around trying to understand, like, how can we make this better? And my question is, when I think about the committee or the recommendation proposal, I'm not really sure what we're trying to do, what the anticipated outcome is. And what I see looking at what was presented here is I see things around gathering data, pulling presentations together, setting up research information, making information available to parents, supporting the community, all of which I think is absolutely fabulous. I remember going to the Reading Public Library and asking for high-low books and people not knowing what that is, right? High content, low technical reading. So that's my biggest question is I'm not sure what we're trying to do with more of that versus actually moving our students forward and really hitting the K1, 2 grades, getting those kids now. Because parents aren't educated. They don't know, when their teacher says, hey, I think this person could work on X, Y, and Z. They're like, okay. So if they're not educated to advocate for themselves, we need to advocate for those kids. So I guess that's my question is what's the anticipated impact?
Do you want to address that?
And thank you. Was it Carissa?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your perspective and your questions. I think a lot of it sits at this part right here. When you put a group of staff members and a group of families together to look at the following things, around identifying areas of strength, looking at additional supports and resources around in best practice, looking at sort of districts that are moving the needle in this area, researching and identifying curriculum tools and pros, cons on things, looking at consultants that are supportive and moving this work forward. I think those are all of the things that are going to make some headway. Can I at this point say, I can't say we are going to choose a new curriculum right now, or we are going to choose this consultant, or we are going to do this. I think that's sort of what the purpose of this committee is, to come together to discuss all of those things. But I think this is the slide that best captures of what the work that we're hoping the team will do together. And then I think if you start doing this work together, we can anticipate sort of what those outcomes would be. I just can't at this point forecast exactly what the outcomes will be without getting the people in the room to discuss. And I want to say I recognize that is frustrating to people too, because I recognize that hearing those 2 past comments of years of feeling that the system has not sort of done well enough for their children and for other people's children, and we have work to do. We can sit here and tell you that we pride ourselves on doing this work well, and we are really committed to moving this work forward, and we are really optimistic that doing this work with this team is going to move things forward, but we realize it's going to take action. We have trust to build, and we get that. So if there's specific things of like wondering of like, are we going to do this, we're happy to answer it. But outside of that, I think that at this point, this slide shows best what the work's going to look like. And I think our hope is that together we can all move it forward.
So the only thing I would ask as well, and is to reiterate the point that both Sarah has made and Tom has made as well, is that we need to do this as fast as possible, especially if we're starting here, we're starting again here, so that we can get to the meaty stuff, the decision-making, and actually implementation, which is, I think, what we're all really looking for, is implementing a change.
And Chris, I want to say one thing to follow up too, is that we realize that even the urgency, I think, has always been important on this issue in the context that we're in right now, where we realize just what the student experience has looked like. I was talking to a second grade teacher the other day who was saying, well, I have a child in my class who last year, their schooling was inconsistent, right, major gaps, and then kindergarten was inconsistent. So they're coming into, second grade with some major areas of need, right? And obviously, at this point, solid, strong Tier 1 instruction is critical for that child to sort of be where they need to be. So I agree with you on the urgency. I think the urgency has been heightened for all of us in seeing where our students are right now, because there is a lot of student needs, and I think at the K-3 level, we realize there's some significant gaps for our students. We're talking to our early childhood providers. I mean, Jen could share some more context. They're saying that students are coming in or leaving the early childhood centers and programs with less and less skills than they have in the past, which is concerning for us, which I think, raises the urgency for us and strong Tier 1 instruction for K-3. So I agree with you, and I'd just like to say, too, that the pandemic context, I think, has only heightened sort of just and exacerbated some of the gaps we saw and the need for us to do this work urgently.
And we are actively working. Not only did we identify some of the areas of need with our early childhood partners, but we are using our grant funding to put things in place to make sure we are being as proactive as possible. So we've actually already done some contracting to have people come in and train not only our preschool staff in early literacy, but we are inviting all of our Reading preschool partners, and the importance of reading and wordplay and all of that they need to know to begin to have those foundational literacy skills. So we are proactively still doing a lot of work while this committee is being formed. We're not stopping and waiting for something to happen. There still continues to be that work as we move forward as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carissa.
I'll just build a little bit on something there too that was stated. And then we can move before we make a decision on this to the other discussion, which is, how or whether the committee can be involved or not. I think what's hidden in here for those people who don't know, I do know that many in the audience do know, is Scarborough's reading rope is the science of reading. And having that as a foundation here is incredibly important to making sure that everything is taught and all the tools are there to teach everything in that rope. Without a single strand, it falls apart, right? Without a single strand, a child's ability to read falls apart. Whether it's phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension, just go down the list. It's all important. Decoding to encoding. If you can't decode, you can't encode, which means you can't spell. So it impacts far more than even reading. And that urgency that, Tom, that you just spoke about, yes, there is a pandemic urgency to it, but that urgency, as we heard, has been here for years, right? And it is something we need to make sure that the appropriate training is there for. I think it's 2018, I think, it was stated that only 44% of the teacher colleges were teaching anything with regard to the science of reading and how to actually instruct reading. 2020, it's up to 51%. But that means 49% of the teacher colleges aren't teaching it, right? What does it mean from a foundational perspective? I'll also just say this as well, it is not a political thing in any way, shape, or form. It comes out of some of the most liberal colleges there are. It is a fact-based thing, right? It is absolutely what's necessary. Is there a one-size-fits-all? No. There's no single curriculum that does this all. It's not a pull it out of the box and do it either. but it is a set of practices, it is a set of studied empirically what will work, what does work with different communities and different populations. So we need to use that as part of this foundation, and that's incredibly important, and I'm very appreciative that that stayed in here from a goals perspective, because it has to be the foundation for getting this right.
So just to speak to the urgency of that, we recognize as a team that teachers aren't coming with some of those foundational skills of just what does reading look like and how is it braided together. And as you said, without one strand, it falls apart. Part of our commitment with that is Renee Lamaro, who's our literacy specialist, actually trained all of our new staff. All means all. We had our high school science teachers trained in the reading rope and really working to get everyone to understand that literacy is everybody's job. And so all new staff, including social workers, psychologists, all teachers were trained at the first couple of days of school. And then as we just did our professional development day, all the special education staff that is new to Reading that missed the training last year was trained. I know that was a question at one point people asked, what was our refresh cycle with the training? So we're being very purposeful about making sure everyone has those foundational skills of just what is the latest research in how reading happens in the brain, because it is not an intuitive process. Speaking is an intuitive process. Learning to read, that is a man-made function that we have to make sure we are very explicit about.
It is quite literally brain science.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, let's be clear about that too. It's not rocket science, but it's brain science. The neuroscience is fascinating when you start looking at the images of the brain and what they did do versus what they can do now. And the changes in the hemispheres and the lighting that happens in those pictures is phenomenal. Getting that understanding throughout the district, from a teacher perspective, from a parent perspective, is critically important. So it looks like we have one more.
Hi, my name is Tara Giardina, 103 Village Street. Thank you very much, first of all, for discussing this. I think it's very important for all our students. I have children that have been in the Reading public school systems in the past, so I don't have any children here now, but the reason why I'm here is because I believe in the science of reading. I have a background in neuroscience, and I'm a nurse, neurosurgery. I guess my biggest question is I keep hearing about special education and the teachers trained, but they're special education trained. What are we doing for the regular ed teachers who are actually teaching the kids in kindergarten, first and second grade for the general classroom?
I was going to ask that question just a second ago.
I'm concerned.
There's some topics in that space, but Dr. Milczewski, Dr. Hardy, you want to address that first? Or?
Yeah. I can mention a few things. Thank you for that question. It's a great point. And, I was thinking about that a bit as we were talking about Tier 1 and the importance of a strong Tier 1 foundation, because that's what catches most of our kids, right? 85 to 90% of our kids. So I can tell you that one of the things we looked at this year too was, as Dr. Milczewski mentioned, we do have a Phonics program that's in place, foundations. So we looked at strengthening some of our teacher practice by updating some training for staff there. So we feel that that has to be implemented with fidelity and implemented really well. There were also some materials that were purchased to support teachers in teaching phonemic awareness. So those materials have been rolled out starting as young as preschool. And so those materials are currently in place. And then the other big piece that that's taken a good amount of our time and training with staff is rolling out the new screenings that we have in place. And so we have a particular screening that's being used in pre-K and K, and then a different screening that's being used in grades 1, 2, and 3. Some of the time that I've dedicated with working with our coordinator of ELA is training the principals. So how are we looking at that assessment data, and how are we using that to identify the students through the screening process that we need to take a closer look at. So there is ongoing work in our Tier 1 and work that will continue over the course of this year and forward.
Okay. Because my other concern is that that should be part of the goal, as far as like really giving them a larger amount of training, because, for instance, special education, the training for Wilson is 18 months, and then they do a preceptorship. Same with Orton Gillingham reading. So I really feel like in order for these teachers in the general education to be teaching groups of children in the general ed, they have to have a really good, strong foundation and knowledge for what it is of the science of reading with regards to phonemic awareness, and then going on with teaching how to decode and encode. And I think that should be really one of the goals here with the committee, because in order to teach reading, you have to have that, and if they don't have that, I feel that it's a waste of time, because then they're not really teaching what they need to teach in order for the children to learn to read. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Okay, so,
Laura also wants to say something. Alicia Williams, Marlene, parent. Some of you weren't professional school committee meeting attenders like me. I have sat in this room downstairs and watched the literacy reading can get continually kicked down the road. It's been picked up, dusted off, and then kicked again. Here we are, picking it up again. In 2017, literacy was the #2 item on the district improvement plan. I don't mean any disrespect to the current administration. I love the energy and the vigor and the positivity, but I am fearful that it will get lost again in the shuffle of the real meat and potatoes of what you need to be doing to run our district. I personally would love to see something happen with this, whether it happens under the school committee, whether it happens under the administration. I just am fearful that if we do put this committee under the administration, it might get lost again. And I'd love to see a timeline that if it isn't making progress, if it isn't getting anywhere, if it's not getting results, that we have a plan, an exit ramp to then maybe shift it if you guys don't pick up the conversation about the school committee picking it up. My kids are in the bubble of the K-3 that are affected by this, and COVID has really exacerbated this problem. So we need to dig in, and we need to figure out how to help all these kids, because it's not the special ed kids. I kind of look at all the students across the board as tiers. You have the high learners who are really, really bright kids who are just going to be okay no matter what happens. You have the really low learners, the kids who are IEPs, who really need that help and support. And then you have the middle of the road kids. And those kids in the middle are just getting by, and they are not getting the help that they need because they're doing okay. But this whole program is going to help all of those students, the high learners, the low learners, and the kids in the middle. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Laura Noonan, Pennsylvania Avenue. I just wanted to say that I've been contacted by some teachers and paras that are employed by the Reading Public Schools who have expressed a desire to support the advisory committee pertaining to reading and writing that had previously been proposed to sit under the school committee. However, they were afraid to speak up publicly in support of this for fear of retaliation. So I just wanted to say that when the teachers in our district are recognizing a need for change in the way that we teach reading and a desire for the committee to be in full transparency under the school committee, shouldn't we be recognizing the same need? I hope that this committee still considers having this advisory committee sit under the school committee and not under the administration as was proposed this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, that might be a good natural transition to the other conversation that we had put in the memo, which is in particular the role and responsibility of the school committee in a place such as this. So, you know, I think that's where philosophically we had kind of the biggest disagreement in the last meeting. So I just wanted to have that conversation, put that where it is. This is an option, this is an idea, it will probably work. The other one is an option, it's an idea, it will probably work, right? Like Dr. Milczewski said, there are pros and cons of both. as we've heard from many, and as we've heard from ourselves, that there's pros and cons to kind of a both. So just to kickstart this conversation, I'm aware, there's a lot of different things at play in regard to this. There are multiple other school committees that have subcommittees of learning and teaching or curriculum. There are MASC guidance documents that specifically talk about creating subcommittees for curriculum. And, most recent one was just 2019. I'm aware that our policy for curriculum adoption in particular says that we review and approve only via financial review and approval. So that's a potential challenge, but the most recent MASC policy has taken that part out, and it's not bound in such a way. In addition, late this afternoon, I was able to get our legal guidance to say basically that the committee, advisory committee as formed, is within MGL from a perspective of structure and what it's doing in terms of providing information, much of which is already out here as well, so the same information would be provided. It is not choosing a curriculum, which does fit with the superintendent and principals. It's providing information so that one potentially could be chosen or provide other supports and feedback as necessary. So I wanted to just have the committee have that conversation because I think it's important that we don't let past trends necessarily impact our future, where those past trends weren't bound in law necessarily or anything else along those lines, but bound in perception. So I wanted to just have that. I'm going to time box this because I don't think we want to be here till 11 o'clock again tonight. So I'm going to time box this conversation probably till 9:10, which gives us 18 minutes. Then we can make a decision on what we want to do on a go-forward perspective. My goal here, frankly, I'm going to put this on the table. I want all 6 of us to be on the same page. That's my goal. I don't want it to be 3-3, 4-2, 5-1. I'd like all 6 of us to be on this because I believe all 6 of us believe in this work, that it needs to happen. I think it's just a question of who and how, for lack of a better way to say it. So, Sean, I see you jumping, ready to jump into this conversation, so please.
Maybe I'm going to surprise some people here. So I would be supportive of the creation of a curriculum subcommittee. What was proposed is not a subcommittee as other towns have a subcommittee, from my perspective, right? And a subcommittee is made up of solely school committee members. It's to advise the school committee on matters related to policy goals, etc. The reason I would be supportive of that is because I think we have a little bit of a false dichotomy here where involvement in this effort is an or. It's a school committee thing or it's an administration thing. This is very much focused on the what and the how. We have a role to play that I think we historically, not we, but historical iterations of the committee haven't necessarily played, which is driving policy and goals that make succeeding against this charge not an option, right? And we, again, I'll say the royal we, meaning previous iterations of the committee, I think have been what I'll call net takers with respect to what the goals of the committee should look like and what the goals of the district should look like and what the goals of the superintendent should look like. I think the way that we give this teeth and play our role from an oversight perspective is being more intentional, more direct, and more specific with respect to the goals that we set for the district, for the superintendent, including progress against all the pieces of goodness that that exist in this sort of charge here. I think that's how we take this forward and how we augment this to be more tangible, more actionable, more real, more impactful than previous iterations, which have been unsuccessful. So that's kind of where I sit on this. I hear you that it's not. It's not illegal per se under MGL for us to create the advisory committee as constructed. I continue to think it's sort of impractical to think that a committee formed under the school committee, which is purely is advisory, can actually be purely advisory. I would rather us be very sort of transparent about what our expectations are in this area and build that into goals and build that into budgeting and build that into policy. And I think us, not tonight, but thinking about a policy subcommittee, which would be focused on this work among other areas, a curriculum subcommittee, which would be focused on pieces of this work as well as potentially other areas of curriculum, focused specifically on how we as a committee create goals that are meaningful, how we make budget decisions that are meaningful, and that support and create accountability for this work is sort of the right path forward. So that's where I'm at this point.
Okay.
And that's a broad comment on curriculum involvement as well as applying to this case.
Okay. Sarah?
You did surprise me, Sean. in a good and exciting way. I think talking through a little bit more the concept of this doesn't have to be either or, it could be both in some ways to support the work to move forward is an interesting thing to kind of maybe spend a few minutes doing. I think to follow what you're saying, Sean, there are a lot of school committees that have curriculum focused groups, and I think, and I came prepared with a full list of all of those, but I think it's interesting to look through some of the topics of those to see the kind of the broad range of things, and also sort of thinking through how could we possibly kind of do both of these things through administration and the school committee. Topics on some of these different curriculum focused type, and I'll specifically call curriculum, but that's the main topic, but everything from math pathways to district accommodation plans, programs of study, ELA and social studies curriculum, leveling, curriculum planning for remote learning, high school course catalog, essential curriculum, math program reviews, child study groups. So there was a lot of work in districts that focused on these kinds of things. How do we look at what we're doing around math programs in our district, and how do we look globally across that and set a plan forward together? So I think taking that in mind and how can we carry that forward here.
Okay. Aaron?
So I just want to clarify, because I feel like there's been a lot of confusion around the subcommittee term. So I want to make sure other people understand that when we talk about a subcommittee, that can only be comprised of school committee members.
Correct.
So I think there was the idea that this advisory committee exists for other school committees. I couldn't find it. I don't know if you know of an advisory committee related to instruction and curriculum for another district. But I am willing to explore the idea of a subcommittee in addition to the committee as outlined by the administration.
Okay, so just to answer that question, or that point, make that point crystal clear. Yes, from a subcommittee perspective, we can only have committee members on it. From an advisory committee perspective, we can have anybody on it, committee, school committee members, or outside, but it's bound by our charter and our bylaws from a state perspective, from a town of Reading perspective. So that was the challenge, right? So to answer your question in particular, I'm aware from conversations I had over the summer that Pentucket has a learning and teaching subcommittee. However, they are actively and regularly including teachers in that conversation, just not as voting members, right? So what we were trying to do was bring in that teacher side and parent side as voting members as well to help move the work forward collaboratively, as opposed to top-down way of it, right? So it was an approach to bring other people to the table, so that and fitting in with what we could do based upon the work that in other districts were doing. So I don't know that. So I think technically you're right. They had a subcommittee, and they were involving teachers in that conversation and parents in that conversation as well. So it was a hybrid, for lack of a better way to say it, in that particular model. And I would say this as well. I'll unabashedly, I'll raise Brent as kind of one of the leaders in the state. That Pentucket group is really moving forward quite aggressively. They've done some amazing work in the work that they're doing in terms of the communication with their stakeholders, in terms of training for their teachers, in terms of the work that they did with the dyslexia guidelines from a state perspective. They were active and contributors of that. They're also very active contributors in the Science of Reading, What I Should Have Learned in College, Massachusetts group that's out there that has 1,700 members in Massachusetts. There's a national version of that has 170,000 members right now. That is the Science of Reading, What I Should Have Learned in College, that most of which are teachers. There's people that are hungry for this information, and that's what we were trying to do by creating the advisory committee, bring those people together and figure out how to move the work forward. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? Carla?
So in I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank you for your thoughtfulness putting this together. I want to thank all the parents who've been involved, who are not only fighting, maybe previously for their own children, but who are continuing the fight for other children. Right? The urgency is here. This is clearly in the purview of the school committee. Right? It has huge budget implications. We have a moral implication, right? We have a moral responsibility to teach our history properly. Everybody is in the same, everybody's going in the same direction, right? We may have different paths of how to get there. I am happy to go with this recommendation presented tonight. I would kind of echo what people are saying. We're just trying to collaborate with what people are saying. Maybe it is at every meeting at the school committee for somebody just to get quick update what was going on. And maybe that's how we're getting that word out there. Every single meeting, it's almost like business to have somebody, it could be somebody on the school committee, administration, doesn't matter. Just give up a quick synopsis of who all that and where the meeting is going. Just to satisfy that need. But I'm happy that this is moving forward and going in the right direction.
Sure. So, like Carl, I really appreciate that you listened and you came back with a proposal. I can get my arms around this, but I do like Sean's suggestion. I mean, we just recently formed the policy subcommittee, and I think that's working very well. I know the chair and the superintendent are ex officio members on that as well.
Technically, but because there's three of you, we can't really show up. So.
But, no, I think it's, I think that's working well. I think the idea of a curriculum subcommittee brings this stuff up to the forefront 12 months out of the year, as opposed to when we're discussing goals or when we're discussing budget type things. There's a committee that's talking about that all the time.
So I do want, I'm supportive of the subcommittee idea. I just want to make sure we're all sort of on the same page here. I view the way that a subcommittee works in this context as, Carla, you and I were a de facto subcommittee when we worked on that policy, right? And it was because work needed to happen between the meetings. It needed engagement with a broad group of stakeholders to come back and help sort of inform or speak to the, bring something back to the rest of the committee. That's sort of what I would look to here. I think the subcommittee's charge, in my mind, would still be focused on the things that are part of our purview. And you're right, curriculum is clearly part of it. Reading is clearly part of our purview from a content area perspective. But from a what decisions, what things do we as a committee, have authority over? Goals, policy, budget, managing the, supervising the superintendent, right? And so in my mind, the way that a subcommittee on curriculum or a subcommittee on reading curriculum or whatever would look like would be doing the work in between the meetings. It's probably not between every two meetings, but doing the work in between the meetings that brings back to the rest of the committee, when we're ready to set goals, when we're ready to evaluate the budget. How does this align with what we're all trying to achieve in terms of reading outcomes? How does this align with the work the administration's doing on the how and the what, through this committee, right? So that to me is how the two would play together. I want to be clear that I don't see the goal as having sort of, parallel committees focusing on the same set of content necessarily, the same set of decisions. They complement each other in the sense that this is how it gets done. Our subcommittee should be focused on what is it that we're expecting to get done from an outcomes perspective, from a budgeting perspective, et cetera. Is that consistent with how everybody else thinks about?
My understanding was that, maybe not tonight, but at a subsequent meeting, we would discuss forming a curriculum subcommittee. And I was envisioning that as a committee that would have periodic meetings with throughout the year with staff about what they want to present to the full committee in terms of curriculum. So have a first round of discussion with that committee before getting to the full school committee. So it's kind of outmade, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some interesting things there to work out. We can put that on an agenda for the December meeting potentially. But I don't want to get past or give, you know, there is a proposal on the table for an advisory committee. The previous discussions were whether or not it is our role and responsibility in some of those conversations. It seems like we now kind of have an agreement that it is, but maybe not. We don't really some people still aren't comfortable with it. So I just wanted to, you know, I said I wanted to time box this to 9:10, so we got 4 minutes left. Is there a way we get to this as an advisory committee, or do we feel like we have to go to this approach and come back with a subcommittee that will work in some degree with this committee?
So, sorry.
That's okay.
I don't sort of accept the premise that we're in broad agreement that this as defined is in our purview. Purview lives on two levels. Purview lives on content, in which case you could say pretty much anything that happens in a school building is within our purview, right? So, you know, curriculum, athletics, you know, pick, you name it, right? And then purview also lives on the level of what are the decisions that we as a committee are entitled to make, and what are the decisions that are reserved for the administration, for building principals, et cetera. My concern with this structure has never been about whether or not we should be involved in sort of driving progress in reading. We absolutely should, right? You know, everything everybody said is spot on in terms of the role for us to play there. My concern has always been about this is getting into a level of operational stuff that we should be aware of, engaged in, participating in. I worry about the structure driving it in a way that is outside of our purview. So that's where the purview question comes into me. It's not about whether or not reading is something the school committee should be focusing on. Of course it is. And I think that's been presented. That's what's been presented as the debate, and that's not the debate. That's never been the debate as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
So
I guess I misunderstand the debate then, but I think anybody have any other conversations?
I guess I would say, what do we want to focus the discussion on? Are we trying to, what's the path forward, proposed path forward?
So there's two paths, right? There's one path that says we, you know, create it as an advisory committee with the structure or some amended structure that we, you know, could discuss. The other path is to say we as a collective, whether that's 2 of us, 3 of us, 4 of us, doesn't really matter how many, aren't 100% comfortable with it as it's written, and so we think we can still move the work forward appropriately with the administrative proposal that's on the table. I'm okay either way. Frankly, I think I'll probably be involved either way, right? So it doesn't really matter to me in that regard, and I do think that there's a benefit to creating a curriculum subcommittee. I think the work is incredibly important. It's urgent. It needs to happen. I'm still a parent as well. So I'm okay either way, but I just wanted to finalize the decision and move on. Aaron?
So I think where we all are in agreement is the need for the work, the need for a committee, the need for the collaboration to bring stakeholders together, the urgency, all of it. To me, the difference was in the purview. And I do not see this as written as being under the purview of the school committee. I see it as ultimately, and what I'm hearing is ultimately what we want to look at are curriculum tools and training for teachers, and that's the how. We might ultimately have to approve the purchase of new curriculum or approve professional development. That I see coming back to the committee. But in terms of making those decisions over the curriculum tools that after all of this you feel are best for the learners of Reading, that's under the administration. So I support what was outlined tonight. It was my understanding that you had supported, that you were in support of that, Tom. So I feel like we're talking in circles.
I'm in support of both, really. I mean, but I do have a preference that the school committee do it, and I think what people are missing here, and I'm going to stop it here, and then we can just decide. It sounds like we're not going to get to 6-0 on the advisory committee, so we'll just move forward to the administration. If anybody wants to vote on that, that's fine with me too. But what's being missed here, from my perspective, is there's no decisions and this is pretty much the charge that's written in the stuff as well. There's no decisions about what tools to use in the charge that's written for the advisory committee. None. Zip, zero, zilch, right? I think it's very clear that the purview of the administration and the principals and whatnot is the decision of what the recommendation would be. This is to provide a few, research-based options, look at things, look at what the options are, look at, kind of, like we were saying, maybe a short list, in addition to what additional things have been drivers of success for this in other districts. So what coaching is necessary, what PD is necessary, some of which may have contractual discussions. Frankly, I think that's one of the things I keep hearing from the administration is there's not enough time for PD right now, right? Which comes back to us fully in our purview. And it leads to goals, it leads to policies as well. So I think there's a fear that the thing that's laid out is choosing curriculum. And we very specifically did not do that. We very specifically went to the points of what are we doing to potentially bring other information in? What does the district and administration team want from an education perspective, from a background perspective, from a who to talk to perspective so they can implement the best practices? And then, what is the impact on that? There's a very specific bullet to come back to the school committee. What is the impact on that from a budget perspective, from a potential policy perspective? And, we could add it today, their negotiation perspective is necessary. So with that said, I'll stop because it's very clear that we're not going to get to 6-0 in that, and that's my goal. So I'm going to propose that we just move forward with the administrative committee, and we'll come back with the curriculum subcommittee and see if that somehow augments this as well as any additional other curriculum things. As Sean and Chuck, not quite on the same page, but as they lay out as potential options. I think we can go to the same page as well.
I like what Chuck said. It's an and for me. Again,
Yes.
That's not an or, it's an and. So,
Can I make a motion?
You can.
I make a motion that the committee accepts the administration's role of reading committee with applicable members of the school committee who are interested in being represented on that committee, and by the school committees having reporting back to the school committee at every meeting.
Samantha's going to have a fun time typing that one back. So the motion that you're saying, just so I can hear it, is you're saying you move that the school committee accepts the administrative committee as laid out, inclusive, I think is what you said, any school committee members who want to be part of it. We have to be careful because if there's more than 3 of us. Yeah.
That school committee members acting in the capacity as parents, not as school committee members.
That doesn't happen. I disallow that.
Disallow that friendly amendment. All right, and so you wanted to report back. So that was the motion.
Yeah.
Is there a second? I'll second the motion. Are there any discussions on the motion?
Yeah, too. In my opinion, if we are, I didn't think this was something for us to approve. I think we're acknowledging that we're not voting for an advisory committee. Therefore, it is in the hands of people sitting across from us. Therefore, the composition will be in their hands as well. So I don't think we're in a position to dictate that they have to allow, they said they might get 30 parents that want to be a part of it. I think they need to assess, maybe 5, 6 however many you choose, who would be a part of it, number one. Number two, we are often meeting every 2 weeks. I don't know that I expect this group to have always met every 2 weeks. So I'm not sure a report at every school committee meeting is a realistic or fair expectation. I absolutely agree with regular updates to the school committees, but I don't know the wording as every meeting is realistic.
The update may be there's nothing before.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Or do we have a second? Did I second it? You did. I seconded it, so that it has a second. Do you want to keep the motion on the table, or given Aaron's feedback, pull it back and just say, this is an administrative committee, we don't vote?
I want to keep the motion on the table because if you two are so interested in having on the committee, then I think that it will be useful for the administration. So I will keep the motion.
Okay. Does the administration have any feedback or comments?
I don't think we're looking to keep people on the sidelines who really want to be a part of this. So whether or not it's written into the motion, I think we're eager to have people who are excited about this work, passionate about this work. I already know a handful of people who are, so it's not my intention to use this as a mechanism to exclude people who I know are very eager to be a part of it. So I can assure you that people, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Still want to leave the motion as it is? Okay. Then we will vote on the motion as it is, which is to go forward with the administrative committee, inclusive of, I guess you're saying, me and Sarah, and to report back to the committee on a regular basis.
Just say one thing, too. I haven't heard it just.
I don't think she said you and Sarah. I said, she said, school committee could be anything.
That was my point.
She pointed to us, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't verbalized.
So I just want to be clear, if we're voting for this, we're saying that they have to allow 2 school committee members on this committee? That's what we're voting for?
That's what the motion says.
Okay.
You want to say something, Tom?
I mean, I appreciate the conversation, and sort of what is this? I think at some point, too, there's the work under the administration. I think there has to be some trust that we're going to move this work forward, we're going to get the right people around it, and I think we'll move it forward. So whether or not that there's like language dictated who we have to have, we'll work with that. But I think even if that's not dictated, I'm confident we'll get the right people around the table and move it forward too. So,
Can I ask you to amend it to just say we decide to move this to the, and we're agreeing with the administrative committee, and that's the motion period. And reporting back. Okay. So we'll amend it that way. That's accepted. So now you're not mandating any of the constituents. It's up to the administration from a constituent perspective, but you're agreeing with the committee. Okay. All right. So all in favor of the administrative committee? All opposed? And it passes 6-0. Okay. Thank you.
Procedurally, do we want a motion to table indefinitely this topic since we've not taken a vote on it?
Yes, just in case. I think one of the off-ramp conversations, I think, was something there, just in case.
Yeah, it can always come back up as new business.
It could.
I'll move to table indefinitely topic D1, Reading and Writing Advisory Committee.
Wait a second. Second by Chuck. Tabling is no discussion, so all in favor? All opposed? And it's tabled indefinitely 6-0. All right, so now we will move on. Thank you. You want to take a break, a bio break? Carla will temporarily leave and she'll come back. Do you want to leave too? All right, and I'm going to be vigilant. 5-minute break. It's 9:19.
Carla. get our numbers and participation up. Thank you for Mayor Juliana for her efforts to boost these participation rates. You'll see the rates that are posted here. Now break it down by percent reported vaccinated, percent not reported, percent reported not vaccinated, then percent not reported. So last time it was just yes or no, and the no melded together, not reported and no. This time we separated those out. So you'll see the percentage is over 90% in all of our school communities. So. Which we're excited about.
And it may be higher.
Could be higher, right, depending on the percent who's not reported. Again, I shared last time too that there's staff. I can read those aloud. I know people are squinting in the audience. So Barrow's 94%, Birch Meadow 91%, Coolidge 95%, Joshua Eaton 95%, Killam 92%, Parker 92%, Reading RMHS 92%, and then Wood End 91%. And then again, as Tom was saying too, depending on the staff who, the ones who didn't report, we're not sure whether they'd fit in yes or no. So we're encouraged by that updated. You'll also see the staffing list. The number of staff might look a little bit different. We cleaned up the list a little bit. We realized that there were some people who were inactive that were still on rosters that we had to work around. Also, for example, at the high school, we had our winter and spring athletic coaches on the list, so we haven't put them in yet. So you might see the numbers evolve sort of as we move forward too and shift from seasons. But this is the best picture of where we're at in terms of staff vaccination data.
And does this include RISE in each of the specific schools where RISE is? So this is the building-based number, not a program or whatever based number.
Exactly. So if you scroll down a little bit, that is a good segue into talking about student rates. You'll see the student vaccination rates, and I'll read these aloud for people in the crowd too, so if you squint. RMHS, 84% fully vaccinated. Parker, 55% fully vaccinated. Coolidge, 58% fully vaccinated. Now, the interesting thing was that we counted RISE staff with RMHS because it's in the same building. Then we also said if we do that same calculation, do we then have to count RISE students, right? So we did the RISE students and a separate calculation below. That drops the percentage of students, obviously, vaccinated down to 81%. It's still over that 80% threshold.
Okay, great. So that was the answer then that we took away, is to see if we had to count them because they're in the same physical building?
Yes,
so
correct.
The answer is yes.
Correct.
Okay.
The answer is yes.
Okay. All right, so we'll move from the vaccination information to the rest of the state data information. And it's not as easy to see because I don't have them as big. But you have the old vaccination rates for the town and for Boston. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And there's a couple of key takeaways here as we go through it. So there are small incremental improvements in each of the categories that we're talking about. So our 12 to 15 in Reading has gone up 2.1% to that 74.6%. Our 16 to 19 in Reading has gone up 1%. Our Boston population, this is all of Boston, not just our Boston, but that's the only good filter to look at, has gone up 4.9% for the 12 to 15 to a 60.9, and 12.3% to 43.6 for the 16 to 19. What is interesting is there's a bit of an anomaly in the data from the state in that there are 106% of our 65 to 74-year-olds as vaccinated. And 104% of our 75-plus-year-olds vaccinated. I don't know if that's because they crossed lines. I don't know if that's because something else happened, but there's an interesting state anomaly there.
Probably boosters.
Could be boosters as secondary shots, or yeah, could be that. Although they don't specifically capture that data yet in the state data. So that's interesting. Last time we met, the Reading average daily incidence and case count rates chart looked like this. So we had it hit a peak and it was starting to come down. We see that we actually did come down for 4 weeks in a row, which was good, but unfortunately for the previous 2 weeks we've gone back up again. So that's bad. And I think those of us who have been receiving the COVID updates know that that's still a continuing trend, unfortunately. So on a Middlesex perspective, you're seeing the same basic trend. Middlesex went up, then it came back down, now it's going back up again for the same basic information that you see there. Since I started it last time, I continue with the other trends, and this is the statewide case count numbers, very similar trend, but you do see some stratification by age, and our student populations are down here in the orange and whatnot. But again, statewide, you're seeing a very similar trend. Little bit of a hump up, not quite as pronounced as Middlesex or Reading in that particular area. Then from a hospital administration or admissions perspective, you're seeing that the hospital admissions are starting to drop as well. And they have been for about a month with no upward trend, which is good. And however, what you are seeing in the hospital information is that more and more of those that are vaccinated are making up the hospital rolls. So you see an upward trend in that case. You do see that ICUs and intubations are dropping down, so maybe it's not as severe in terms of a trend base, but the hospitalization of vaccination rates, those that are vaccinated, is increasing continually. In terms of the clusters, last month we saw that the clusters for in-school was, a relatively insignificant number of like 0.27. I think it's actually in the document. That number has now gone up a little bit, and I think, we have observed some of that as well, potentially. You never can know exactly where somebody got it from, but I think we're counting, Dr. Milczewski, if they're in test and stay and they come back positive, we're considering that an in-school transmission, even if they were potentially getting it from a sport outside of school or something else like that.
If there were no known outside exposures.
Known.
Known is
the key, right?
Yep.
So that's this blue number is the K-12, and because RISE kind of fits in that child care area and we have child care related lower families, you can see that there's a little bit of clusterization happening there. With that said, we still have 90% of the clusters are household clusters, and I think we can speak to that being true in the data we're seeing as well, is that many of our students that are becoming infected have had relationships in the household and their household related infections. The last one I did as I was looking at this was looking at the trend of data from April forward for all of the confirmed cases, those that required hospitalization and those that were confirmed or probable deaths by age group that's there. So you see the whole set of data, and what comes in with that is interesting from a rate perspective. So less than 0.5% of the 0 to 19-year-olds that get infected end up in the hospital, and 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 ends up, unfortunately, passing away potentially from COVID. So that's a pretty low rate. However, if you go to our upper ages, you see 42.4% of those in the 80+ range that get COVID end up in the hospital, and 18% of them end up potentially passing away due to it. What is interesting in the state data is they do not have confirmed deaths. They have confirmed and probable. They do have confirmed hospitalizations and confirmed cases. So that's just an interesting note from a severity perspective. So summary-wise, our vaccination numbers are looking good. We have the recent 2-week uptick in the case count and average in Reading and Middlesex, which is not going in the right direction. Statewide, there is downward trends that's consistent, so hopefully Middlesex and Reading will revert to that. There is positive from an severity perspective for ICU and intubations, but we are seeing more vaccinated people going into the hospital as well. And we do see a slight uptick in the cluster cases for K-12 and child care. And then finally, the hospitalization rate and death rates for our younger population is very, very low. So that's the data from a background perspective. And now the conversation, I think, turns to the policy itself to see if anybody has any feedback, thoughts, questions, concerns. I think, and Dr. Milczewski also has done some research with regards to the DSE mandate and what it means. So if you want to share some of that now, it'd probably be good as well.
Perfect, thank you. So as I shared in a recent update, the commissioner recently extended the mask mandate until January 15th. And that mask mandate requires students and staff to wear masks indoors. And however, there is an off-ramp, as we've talked about, there's an off-ramp if there's a particular school where there's 80% students and staff are vaccinated. There's then an off-ramp to remove the mask mandate sort of at the state's mask mandate and have sort of more local control, with the caveat though that there's unvaccinated students and staff remain in masks. Now, we've done a little bit of homework over the past couple of days to dig into this. So there's the line here says, in alignment with statewide guidance, unvaccinated students and staff would be required to continue to wear masks. So I wanted to look into this a little bit because I had some questions about this from many different stakeholders. So I think regardless of where people feel about masks, we were saying, is it reasonable, is it fair to students to operationalize a policy where some students would be required to wear a mask and not others, right? And I think that's a really difficult thing to enforce and a really difficult thing to put our students and staff in that position. So we dove a little bit into like what is the teeth to that requirement? The part that says in alignment with statewide guidance, if you click that, it references some guidance from DPH, which there's not a ton of teeth to that necessarily has requirements or things like that. So knowing that, I also reached out to the commissioner's office today, and I spoke with a few people at the state who shared that while that part about in alignment with statewide guidance isn't the part that carries as much teeth, the part that does carry teeth is the fact that this is a mandate from the commissioner. So if we were to, since the commissioner mandates that any time of learning, the only type of learning that's going to count is in-person learning, and when in person, students need to wear masks, and then the only way the off-ramp is with 80% and unvaccinated needs to remain in masks. That's the only off-ramp, and that's the mandate. If we were to go against that, they said the commissioner would be comfortable using sort of whatever mechanisms, to sort of make sure that we're in compliance. And the one that they used sort of in the call today was talking through specifically the potential loss or not counting the time as time on learning, because those days we wouldn't be in compliance with DESE's mandate. So I share all that to say I know there's different perspectives in the community around masking, not masking. Also just want to make the community clear on just sort of what the mandate says from DESE on that piece around unvaccinated students would still need to be staff would still need to be, in masks. So I want to give that context as the committee dives into conversation.
Did Mary Giuliano weigh in too? Well, did we have
Yeah, I have speak with Mary on a daily basis about this. I can share. I don't think any administrators in our district, Mary inclusive in that term, administrator, is comfortable with a policy that has some of our students wearing masks and others not. Right? We don't think that that's fair to students or to staff. I don't want to publicly sort of share Mary's opinion here on the stage, but I think for me the sticking point is not sort of the masks necessarily at this point. It's that some in, some not. That has been the real discussion point for us as a community.
Just to build on the time on learning side, so everybody hears it for those at home, if we do not meet our time on learning requirements, they can start proportionally discounting and pulling back money from the district. Chapter 70 money,
yep.
In accordance, right? So if I recall, a couple of years ago, it was a little over 7 million, almost 8 million. It might be more now. I haven't seen the numbers from this year.
Yep.
But if they can start proportionally pulling that back, we could start losing 100,000, 100,000, 100,000, 100,000.
Yep.
Theoretically, if we're not hitting those numbers.
In my path was certainly not advocating that we don't follow in line with DESE's guidance. I had many questions to the communities of like, what are our possibilities or what are the ways sort of we can think through this? So I just wanted to give that context, but you're exactly right. In superintendent calls, there's been a lot of conversation of the risk of losing funding if we're not in compliance.
Okay. Any other committee questions, comments, thoughts?
It's interesting that after a year and a half, DESE is finally taking a strong stance on something with respect to this. I don't know where that was for the last year and a half. I feel like this puts us in a position where we don't actually have local control in practice until that part of the mandate is lifted. Because to me, it's a non-starter that we're going to have 1/6 of our high school students, wearing that scarlet letter essentially. It's just a non-starter. I'm very pro-vaccination, but it's nobody's business, what decision, an individual has made. And, and one of the letters that we got, that may or may not have made it in the packet for this time, made the great point that there are students who aren't, making that decision. They're medically unable to get vaccinated. And do we want to put them in a position where they're having to go explain themselves to people who are judging them for a decision they may or may not have been able to actually make on their own. So in practice, I think this puts us in a position where we can't take that off ramp, and even consider that off ramp until that portion of the language is revoked by the commissioner. That's my perspective.
Anybody else? Okay.
I'll say something.
Carla?
I'm sure, like all of us, we've been struggling with this one quite a bit. I am in favor of taking off masks at the high school. I am not in favor of saying that unvaccinated people in high school have to have their masks on. It's not fair. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I am really concerned about the mental health of our students, and I don't think these are helping them. I would, and I've been thinking of different scenarios and how do you move forward with this. And Sean, you're right, Desi finally took a stand and they took a, in my opinion, they took a loud stand, right? They always had everything at our level, at the local level, and they kind of hung us up to dry a bunch of times. And now they're, as far as I'm concerned, imposing things on us and not in a timeline. So I've been thinking about this a lot. A couple of ideas that I have come up with is potentially to look into funding of antibody testing, right, for people who are not masked, who are not vaccinated, and having antibody testing. So if the antibodies that are at the appropriate levels, they can take off the mask. That kind of aside. I would like, if there is agreement on the committee of petitioning DESI and getting other communities who have the same thought as us involved to petition DESI to demand that they take out that portion of their requirement.
So I think there's an interesting reason here. For those of us that watch the MASC listserv, DESI got strong because certain communities kind of forced their hands to get strong. It wasn't something that, and this is why it happened so late for us in August, right? It wasn't something they came out with initially. It was a result of pressure from other communities and other committees. So if there is interest in saying, we really think, I think there's a question here. There's I guess a statement of debatable fact, but if you're vaccinated, you can still pass the disease just as if you're unvaccinated, you can pass the disease. If you're vaccinated, you can get the disease just as if you're unvaccinated, you can get the disease. It might be a difference of severity, but that's a bit of a choice question. And obviously we have to keep the kids in school. I think that's always been our driving point, is keep the kids in school. But if we don't really have an off-ramp, and Sean, to your point, we have no local control in this case because of the hammer of financial, penalties to a degree. So I'd be okay with saying we would want to write a letter or somehow petition DESI or build, see if there's other committees who want to do that. We know that there are 20 other districts in the state that have filled out their paperwork to say they're eligible to do so. Doesn't mean they want to. But I think it's one thing this committee has not done. Another one of the things this committee has not done is actively engage in advocacy at the state level. And it is in our policy set, it is kind of in our charge. So it's a question of whether or not we're interested. I don't know that we would have a unanimous thing from a committee perspective. That's something we even want to do. But I think it's worth having at least a brief conversation. And again, I want to time box that to 9:50 because it's 9:43 because we still have many things left in the agenda. So if there's anybody else who has any thoughts on that, I'd hear them now and we can figure out if we want to go forward.
I would just suggest that an active advocacy position might be premature, and the only reason I say that is because I think that what DESI is signaling with January 15th, and I watched some of the discussion, is that a clear sort of marker for them in terms of when do we move to more of a steady state is the availability of the vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds.
Okay.
So I'm anticipating, based on what I understand to be the discussion that DESI's had, that's a sort of a key determinant that, by say mid-January, late December, when a large number of the 5 to 11-year-olds who are going to be vaccinated will have been vaccinated, that creates sort of a different, you're approaching the end of whatever the horizon is going to look like at that point, in terms of vaccination rates in schools. And so to me, that feels like a sort of logical thing for us to wait and see how that unfolds. Frankly, I wouldn't have been in support of it, for those reasons until January anyway, as much as I'm frustrated by the lack of actual local control here. So I think that's a sort of a reasonable, just from a timing perspective, I think it's probably premature for us to engage in that advocacy personally. But.
So, Sarah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that. This will share that as well, but I think waiting to see what things look like with the 5 to 11 population now that that's been approved. So I think that's a premature discussion, regardless of what side that we might individually fall on. I think we're seeing clusters of cases pop up in unvaccinated populations, likely stemming from community sources that have different masking or lack thereof policies as well. So sports, etc., where there aren't necessarily mask guidelines, and we're seeing that in the micro school population as well. So I think that conversation is probably premature in terms of the local control.
I'm going to take an exception. You cannot base that on masks. Right? You can't say it's the masks. The masks are the reason why.
Sure. I'm going to disagree. I'm going to trust Ben people I go into already. All I'm saying is there are community transmission is going up. There are outbreaks on team sports, and they do not have mask policies as well. So where we're seeing there's lower transmission in situations where there are more mitigation strategies, there's higher transmission where there are fewer mitigation strategies.
Right. So at home, right?
Correct, but there are team outbreaks happening right now.
Kids are getting, the transmission of COVID in schools versus the transmission of COVID at home are two different things. So as far as I'm concerned, if you want to stop the transmission, then you have the option to wear a mask at home, right?
That's not where it's happening. It's happening in team sports, in team outbreaks. I'm going down path.
Yeah, I'll just stop there because I think we're both, you're actually both right. It's happening a lot at home, as the numbers show, and we're seeing that happen, and it's happening a lot in youth sports.
Yeah, that's not
right. It's not our high school sports.
Not the high school. You got to be clear about that.
Unvaccinated younger kids.
Unvaccinated younger kids, youth sports, and indoor sports. That's the difference, right? All of our fall sports are outdoor sports, and they don't need to wear masks in that context. Once they start coming indoors for hockey, for basketball, they'll still have to wear a mask again. That's the policy that we have. So that is not necessarily being applied in the youth sports area.
If I could just take that into I feel like we're going this way unless I want to take it perfectly. In terms of, in my mind, in terms of what's best for students, kids are faring much better than adults are with this virus. And to put masks on kids when the threat of the virus, we're unduly putting pressure on our kids. We're putting masks on our kids, we're putting vaccines into our kids. And the kids aren't the ones who are being affected by it, right? And I'm not saying every child, God forbid, right? But a lot of children, right? The kids in Reading who have gotten infected, they are not going to hospitals. So I think and like I said, with the whole emotional impact, even when Kevin Tracy came and spoke about the high school and the mental impact on these kids, I just feel like these are, we as society should not be looking to our kids to protect us as adults. Kids don't save adults. And I think these, signal that there's something wrong with kids. I feel really strongly that we as a society, as adults, have to look and see what the true impact is on our children.
I think we've heard time and again about the difference, the challenges the kids are having. Some of it could be attributed to finally returning to school in a full-time capacity. Some of it, could be attributed to the mask side. I don't know if we have I haven't seen any firm studies on the mask itself being the challenge for kids. If somebody has, I'd like to read it. So I think it's a fair point. It's an interesting point. It's something we need to talk about. But I think where I'm hearing the committee is right now, we're in agreement that we cannot kind of disproportionately pull masks off of, 5/6 of our population. We don't think that's fair. So in essence, I think right now we're saying there's no changes to our policy as it is. I also don't hear an agreement necessarily on moving forward with any sort of advocacy. So in order for us to move forward with the rest of the meeting, I'd like to finish it there unless anybody has any major objections.
Can we take a vote on the advocacy piece of it?
If you want to make a motion, yeah, I think, but let's keep it quick and keep it to the point, yeah.
Okay, I motion that the committee reaches out to other communities, to DESI, to apply mask mandates universally across schools and not guide for vaccination status.
Mask mandates or mask demandates, as the case may be. So, okay. So let's see if we can simplify it. Would the motion be that the committee or a representative of the committee reach out to other school committees and to DESI to remove the unvaccinated student portion of their mandate at a suitable time in the future? Is that what you're saying?
That were the masking requirements.
The whole thing?
You just added at a suitable time in the future.
But I'm just trying to figure out how we can get to.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Aaron, go ahead.
If, based on your wording, would you also be asking for the 80% threshold? Because if you're taking out vaccination altogether.
With the 80% threshold, the piece of it that I'm concerned with is
Right.
So,
for example, our high school is over 80%, but you want to advocate that unvaccinated, once you're over 80%, should not have to wear a mask.
Mask mandates have to apply to the entire school.
Can I offer a friendly amendment? Advocate to remove the language that differentiates between vaccinated and unvaccinated students in the off-ramp guidance.
Yes.
That's what we're saying? Okay.
So is there a second?
I mean, I'll second it.
You'll second it?
Yeah.
So you're comfortable with this friendly amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Along the 80%.
Yeah.
Yeah, all we're talking about is that differentiation between vaccinated and unvaccinated students. That's what you're suggesting. Yeah, and I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that motion?
I don't think it's a good idea at this time. Sorry.
Well,
that's my discussion.
The one thing I'll say to that, I think, is advocacy takes a while, and if we think that come January 15th that they may still say, yes, once a school is 80%, but those are unvaccinated, still have to wear it, then we could make the argument that come January 15th, if you want to extend it to February 15th, that's fine, but take the unvaccinated part off. Right? So there's 2 months of time to do that kind of advocacy in preparation for the January announcement.
Understand.
So, Eric.
So, I agree with wanting to see the vaccine play out with our younger population because, I've said before, a lot of our high schoolers have younger siblings at home, my household being one of them. I'll also anecdotally share that 4 out of 5 members of my family got COVID last year. I 100% got it from my children. My children did not get very sick, but their parents were extremely sick. So it absolutely impacted their lives in a very big way. And they knew, they gave it to their parents. So I don't think it's as simple enough to say kids don't get as sick. That being said, if what we're talking about is doing research and talking to other school districts and seeing where they're at, I have no problem with that at all. So that's what I'm hearing. You want to talk to other school districts, find out where they're at, find out if there are other people in agreement with this.
I want to talk to other school districts and say the thought on, that's not, the thought for our school committee is that we would like that to to look at the offering and the recommendation and not differentiate unmasking vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And if people feel the same way, the petition Desi that way, then get them on board to where they don't to petition Desi.
So it's not research, it's an active orientation towards changing our language.
So then I'm more conflicted on that, because I'm not ready to advocate for that right now.
Okay, so there's a motion. I need a
I'm
second.
not hopeful that in January 15th that they can change their still function.
Yeah, I hear that. I just also know, like, last year we saw a huge spike after the holidays, and sports, so I would want to, if we get to January and we're talking about this again, I would want to look at the data in January and not make a determination now.
Yeah, I think what we're saying is we're not going to make a determination on what we're going to say in January, but we want the ability to say that when we're ready to take it off, we're taking it off for everybody, not for those that are vaccinated or unvaccinated, or we have that option, right? Give the local option back is essentially what this is what Carla's advocating for.
But what I heard is that we're automatically going to petition if we support this, and I'm not ready to say that.
We would, I think what Carla's saying, and Carla, correct me if I'm wrong, is we would petition to give the local body back that option of what they're going to do. Not necessarily that we would do it, but that we would have the option. And obviously, if we had the option, then we might do it, but we don't have the option right now. As we started this whole conversation, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. Okay, so in order to...
Can I just, but it's, what Carlo, I think, wants to do is do that now. And I think what you're saying is we can do the work to do it in January, right? So there's two separate times. I mean, because we could decide in January that we're going to do it. We don't need, you can do the research now with communities and not actually do the advocacy work or the petition until January.
Yeah, but I think where Carla is and where I am, I think we're on the same page here, is that it's November 4th. By the time you get all that research together, you get that letter together, it might be December 15th. You have the reality of it is you have to petition to DSE, to the Board of Education there. That's going to take time before they prepare for their announcement in January. So I don't think, maybe Carla's trying to do this, I don't think it's reasonable that they're going to change their plans before January, and maybe that, is what she wants, but I don't think it's reasonable. But I think what is reasonable is that they they adjust their guidance for post-January 15th as they go to January 15th. And that takes time, right? It's not something that they can act on it tomorrow. Even if we sent a letter tomorrow, there's no way they could act on it, right? And that's, I think, that it's the timing of it that prepares that I think we're going, that I'm on that page of let's advocate so we have the off-ramp, but at the same time, we don't necessarily say we'll take it, but if we don't have it, we don't really have it.
Can I move the question?
Yes, you can.
I move the question.
Okay, so the question's been moved, it's not debatable. I guess there is a question of whether or not to move the question, so we'll go through that. I'll play my Alan Folds hat today.
Moving question is not debatable. But
moving the question, right, it requires two-thirds vote.
Yeah.
So all in favor of moving the question?
Which just means ending debate.
Which just means ending debate, exactly. All right, so the question's moved. So now, all in favor of the motion, which would be to research, then advocate that the off-ramp is adjusted to pull off the unvaccinated portion of it, right? We'll do a hand vote on this too, because everybody can see it. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? And it fails 2 to 4. Okay. All right, so let's move on. I don't think there's any further discussion on the policy itself or anything on in this point. So the ARPA full-day kindergarten budget strategy. So as brief introduction, and then I'll hand off to Sean to do a little bit more, and Susan as well. Coming out of the financial forum, on the 20th of October, and with the committee that's being established between FinCom, Select Board, and School Committee, it's pretty clear that we're not going to have any sort of decision around whether or not we can use ARPA funding for the next school year. So this conversation is meant to say, what do we want to see as a committee as we prepare the budget so that Susan, Tom, and others can do what they need to do to prepare the budget for January. You know, what kind of optionality do we want to see? What sort of cost analysis do we want to see, et cetera? And Sean, you want to kick any further on that?
Yeah, I'll just add two other things. Tom, I think your list here is sort of a good one. The thing I would add to it is that there probably are sort of multiple paths we could pursue. I don't think we have to assume that, you know, fully funding full-day kindergarten next year is the only potential path. There could be, you know, other ways to get there over time. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I would just say is, it's maybe embedded in your bullet 3 here, but another path, and one that, you know, I think there's probably an opportunity for us to explore over the next, you know, few weeks or month, is having a discussion about positioning this as a community priority, which would be, you know, more about engaging the town manager and the town accountant in that discussion, which you know, would to some degree lessen the need to think about it as an impact to our operating budget. You know, we could think about that as sort of a 1 year, you know, as a 1 year Band-Aid, and then hopefully we're pursuing ARPA funding, you know, ARPA funding once that committee is established. But there's, you know, there are a few different sort of paths still in play here, I think. I just want to call that out.
So in essence, we're trying to give guidance for what we want from a budget packet perspective. So any thoughts, any questions in addition to what we've already laid out here, or any affirmations of what's been laid out by anyone here? Chuck?
Just a question what you just said, Sean. So you're saying that we're basically taking two roads. One would be to see whether we can use, how quickly we can use the ARPA, or if we don't do that, or if we can't do that, petition it as a community priority.
I would assume at this point for the upcoming budget season that ARPA is not going to happen. I think my read is that the select board has been pretty clear that they're sort of looking to engage in the FinCom process, which is going to be more time. You know, it's going to take more time than we'll have to do it for December and January. So I think that what we're looking at this point is what can we do sort of within our own budget, right? Within our own operating budget, plus the, you know, potentially the balance in the revolving accounts. And then potentially that community priority path, which would fund it at least for 1 year out of accommodated costs, and put us in a position to have the ARPA discussion for years 2, 3, 4, for instance. You know, to support that glide path we've been talking about, to wean off of it into our operating budget. It would support that glide path in kind of future discussions. So I think
that's kind of the way I understood it. So
yeah.
I think the discussion tonight then should be more around whether we start preparing to ask for a community priority.
I think that's one option. I mean, it may be a good option. I think the risk that lies with that, and you know, we have talked about some of it, not all of this. This one we haven't talked about necessarily, is if we go with the community priority, but then we don't get the agreement to use the ARPA funding for the rest of the time, where are we the next year, right? Where does that, what kind of bind does that put us in, right? So I think I think we have a very good argument to use ARPA. I think we can certainly build that, and I know Sean, Susan, Sarah, and others have been building that behind the scenes in terms of all the data that's being gathered and the impacts to some of our communities and whatnot that's part of that. But I want to be careful that we don't put ourselves on a cliff.
I guess my biggest concern about the danger of the ARPA is what you said, that the staff has figured out that we're using it right. Then it's our job as a committee to make sure we advocate, lobby the select board that we can use it for this. We want this money. You know, it's not just, I mean, it's the community's money.
Yep.
Just one point. Sorry, Aaron. You go ahead. You're first.
So I just want a clarification. I think you said you had to run an informational meeting last night. So in terms of a timeline, because it's been a few years, but in hindsight, we had to choose by late December if we were going to register our child for full-day kindergarten. So at what point do we owe our incoming kindergarten families accurate information for you know, if there's going to be tuition, what it's going to be, because that's a deciding factor for a lot of people. If it's going to stay the same, some people can't swing that. If it's going to be less, we might see even more, and that impacts planning for next year. So just in terms of timeline, what are we looking at for those families?
I can say during the budget development process, we'll present a budget to, Dr. Milachewski will present a budget to you mid-December. You'll have a period of time between December through January to discuss and evaluate. So it's during the month of January that we expect we'll be able to have more information about a fee and what that fee would be for full-day K.
Are you asking for registration prior to that this year?
Go ahead.
I can also say we're going through our new registration process. So registration forms will be available for families to complete in January, and we're moving toward an on-site registration process to make it more effective and streamline the process and more convenient for families.
So if I could just add, you know, I think the pragmatic answer is the sooner the better, that we sort of have clarity on this, right? And I think if we, my gut, you know, always hard to read town, sometimes hard to read town meeting, who knows, but, and it'll be a completely new town meeting in April, which will be a whole fun experience as well. But the, you know, my gut is that if we were to come forward with a community priority that has support on the town hall side, that has support broadly from this committee, support from the administration, I'd like to think that would go through from the funding process. So I think it would be, you know, we'd be in a position to start talking about, we think this may happen in the fall, and have sort of a parallel planning path there. Well, that was hard. The other thing I would say is that there was one of the communities made the decision in July and told families that, oh, guess what? Half day's going away, you're all going to be full day when you come here in the first week of September. I'm not suggesting we do that, but you know, that's generally news that's well received when a community finally gets to that threshold. So anyway, I'm not suggesting we take that approach by any means. I'm just calling out that it has happened very late in the game in other communities where they've had to sort of fight through a budget process to get it done. The other thing I'll say is, just Tom, on the community priority point, it's not, I don't think historically it's been the case that the community priority sort of only lives for 1 year, like our CASA when it was funded as community priority.
Could be there.
There was an understanding it was a multi-year commitment, it was a multi-commitment. So, I think if we were to approach this as a community priority, it would be, let's establish this as a community priority to get us going. We believe this is a viable use of the ARPA funds, which would buy us years 2, 3, and 4 to sort of build this into our operating budget over time. And we'll come back in the spring and have the ARPA discussion and have community priority essentially as a backstop for future years is how I would think of that and how I would sort of approach it personally. But obviously there's many conversations that need to happen with others to sort of make that make sense.
I wonder, I mean, I hear you from a community priority perspective. I think actually one of my concerns about funding it as a community priority is it just becomes this locked-in number, and we haven't actually addressed how to fund it in a more robust or thoughtful way, right? It just says, here's the number, we want to have it. I'd like to make sure we think about it in terms of what other, keep coming back to the invest to save conversation. What is this going to help us with from another perspective, that we don't just keep rising and rising and rising the overall budget over time, because we have to be conscious of that. Yes, we have a healthy free cash number right now. Yes, we have a healthy ARPA number coming in. We just heard today the state's moving forward with some of their other, $3.7 billion worth of budget let's just say free cash on their side as well that they're trying to distribute and figure out what to do. So there's other types of money coming in those things, but I want to also be conscious of it, and so. But
I'm sorry. The community priority with a sunset on it, so it's, I think is what you're getting at, is that it's not there forever. It kind of gives us that opportunity, like Sean says, to do, to gradually build it into our budget.
Right, and I think that's what ARPA was, what we were trying to do with ARPA too,
That's right,
is gradually build it into our budget. So I'm comfortable with that idea, but I also think we want to make sure we figure out how we're adjusting certain things. So, I mean, going back to the memo, the first thing I think, Aaron, to a degree, this goes to your question as well, is really what does the full day kindergarten revolving account look like? What do we need right now? Is it the same number we always thought it was? You know, do we really need that amount? Is it like the 1.2, 1.3 million, or is it 600,000, 800,000? That changes the game pretty significantly about what we need to actually, you know, fund the staff that are involved with this and the facilities and maintenance and everything else. I mean, historically, that revolving account was built that way because of other challenges from a financial perspective, and legally allowing a bunch of things to go into it that maybe we don't need to have go into it anymore. So is there another review that we can do of that to say, what is it that really should be funded from the revolving account? Taking a little bit more, not throwing everything in the kitchen sink in there that could legally be, but that we really think logically fits in there, so that we know what the number is that we're targeting. And then what is the impact of that on the operating budget if we take those things that are funded by the revolving account out, and what is the impact on the operating budget now? So that could be the first step, and that could lead to, you know, instead of $4,500 a year, we're talking about $2,500 a year, right? Or yeah, that's what it is right now, right? Or is it per month? $44.50, right? So that's a pretty big chunk if you're able to bring that number down, and so that can start to, because one of the other ideas we talked about is to start to bleed the revolving account down, right? In the past, right? So that it's not continually maintaining, you know, 750,000 or whatever, so it has the appropriate stuff for the next year, but we're bleeding it down 250,000 a year, so our reliance on it becomes smaller and we become part of the regular stuff. So I'd like to see more on that revolving account, maybe December timeframe if possible, to really see what is it that we need to fund it and how much do we need, what are the assumptions from a child head count perspective, how many teachers go with that, etc. So that we can go into January from a budget perspective with a little bit more understanding. And that leads to two as well, in terms of what the impacts would be. What were we funding there that we're no longer going to fund there? Does that mean that we have to pull some money out of curriculum to support that? Does it mean we have to pull some money out of PD to support that? You know, we need to understand what the pro-cons are, because that also leads to what is it that we're actually asking for from a community priority? Is it 600,000? Is it $1 million? Is it $1.2 million? What is it that actually is the number we're asking for? If that makes any sense. Carla?
Is the proposal that year number one funds are taken from accommodated cost? And then we go to ARPA for 2, 3, 4?
There's not a proposal at this point, but that scenario I described, like that would be one way to do it. Whatever amount of funds we need to make us sort of whole, you know, that we can't accommodate in our operating budget, or by starting to spend down the revolving fund or other methods that are sort of within the school committee control, we would pursue a community priority to sort of close that gap, and then potentially ARPA to, you know, close whatever gap remains in future years as we continue that sort of drawdown. So, I mean, that's a scenario I was describing, but we're not in a place yet where I would say that's the proposal, right? You know, I don't want to get put the cart ahead of the horse here.
In terms of years 2, 3, and 4 with ARPA, it doesn't sound like it's, we're looking at it as that we're going to fund it fully. Or we are going to fund it fully. Or are we going to just, with the ARPA?
I mean, again, it's, you know, TBD, right? You know, we need to look at the other impacts to the budget and what we can accommodate in the operating budget over time, and you know, what the current balance and revolving fund will allow for. You know, I mean, there's I think are a number of questions in different scenarios that could play out there.
Obviously, my concern is accommodated costs if you're going to fund it year one fully.
Yep.
That impacts our budget, right? If we're taking it off the top.
We share.
Sure, yeah.
Right,
Yep.
it's still impacting by 2/3, right? You're figuring out what money you have, you're taking off accommodating costs and you're dividing it.
Yep.
So it's still going to affect the budget somehow.
Right.
Unless, and that's where 3 was initially focused on, the advocacy with the finance committee, to say, is there a one-time spend here on top of the already allocated money that we would want to advocate for?
And that's not what we're transitioning it in.
That there could be many different ways, and but I guess the point here is, what information do we want as a committee to make sure that we know our ducks in a row and that we know what we're asking for, right? I mean, that's ultimately what the goal here is. And so I think it really is, what is the operating cost of full-day kindergarten? You know, from a purist perspective, we're gonna have the building, we're gonna have custodians, we're gonna have principals, we're gonna have the lights on, we're gonna have, you know, clean the rooms anyway. So whether it's a kindergarten class or a first grade class, so what is it that is the full-day kindergarten operating cost? Is that a fair summary for people? Yeah.
I was gonna ask the superintendent, what was the, did you get a sense for a lot of people the other night, or was it enrollment wise, or is it too early?
I think it's still early. Last night was the first sort of kindergarten information night, and we didn't collect anything outside of just like email addresses, contact information at this point. So difficult to kind of tell, but I think there's a lot of people asking about the full and half day and cost. I was sitting down with one family who was saying we're weighing all different private school options as well. You know, the cost does play a factor in it. You know, what we're doing full half day matters. So I think there's a lot of people knowing this conversation about it who are very interested in hearing what we do. But I don't know enough to, you know, at this point to know how that would this would drive sort of decision-making from families.
So that actually raises another thing I'd like to raise in this conversation. Another revolving account that's one of my favorites, extended day. Right, if you're putting your child in full day private, oftentimes you're gonna get a literal full day.
Yeah.
Right, so what is it, what does the extended day look like? What does our enrollment look like? What does that revolving account look like? And if we do go full day and we add another, you know, 20, 30 kindergartners that potentially would actually take advantage of that, what does that mean to our revolving accounts from an extended day perspective as well? And I understand that we've kind of rebuilt that account, so that's good. We probably should get an update on that anyway. But I think that would play into this because of that comment that you just mentioned. That was something we actively considered at the time, right? I mean, how are we going to get our kids out of K? We're both working downtown at the time. What happens to them at 2:30? They don't, you know, poof, they don't go in the air, right? They have to go somewhere. So that's when extended day actually started, was right at that time as well, when my kids were starting to go to kindergarten. So I think that's a key factor in here as well. Okay, anything else from anybody on the committee? Okay, I think you've heard enough. Susan, any questions from you?
No, that's very helpful, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move on to new business, and there's a discussion for hybrid meeting technology options, costs, and method of funding. So just a bit of background here, and then we're going to postpone the greater discussion. We continue to work on what it would look like to have this be a more integrated, you know, hybrid type meeting environment. In some of the initial costs that Julian was able to pull together, it could be a little substantive, so we wanted to, I didn't feel like as a chair I should make that decision. I wanted us to have the conversation and kind of go through option A, option B, option C. It took a little longer than expected with the vendors, so we're not ready to present it tonight. But I want the committee to know we continue to work on that. I know it comes up at CPAC, for example, as a regular occurrence. And I know that many parents and teachers appreciated the ability to engage. So, you know, we'll push this off until we have more details. And so we're going to indefinitely postpone, or I'm going to ask for a motion to indefinitely postpone, but I hope that we'll be ready for the December 2nd meeting so we can move this overall topic forward. So Sean, you have a motion for me?
Yeah, there's not an active motion, so postponement isn't indefinite. So I would say move to postpone to a future meeting, item E1, discussion on hybrid meeting technology.
Seconded by Chuck. All right. I don't think we need discussion. So all in favor of postponement? Sean, is your hand raised?
Yes, it is. Sorry.
Okay. All opposed? It passes 6-0 postponement. Okay. We do not need to go forward with E2 either, based on the decision we made on O1. So we can just strike that because it's an if necessary. Although we did definitely postpone the other one, but we'll bring that back if we need to. So policy IKF. So Erin, I'll pass the mic over to you. You want to introduce it, what the work was and where we are with it.
Sure. So as I said earlier, on October 8th, the policy subcommittee met with Kevin Tracy, the principal of the high school, Lena Williams, the director of the school counselor department, and Dr. Sarah Hardy, our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Learning. So we wanted to look at this policy for a few reasons. One is that our current policy only requires 3 years of mathematics, but the Math 4 framework recommends 4 years of mathematics. Also, it just had some really outdated language and a few aspects to it that were really more procedural. So for example, we renamed foreign language to world language. We renamed practical arts to business and technology. We added and performing to fine arts. We spelled out the actual names of the health classes that our students take. We removed the early graduation clause. It was explained that students really can't earn 90 credits before the end of their junior year, and with the requirement of 4 years of English and 4 years of math, it seemed like something that wouldn't be a regular occurrence. We removed the credit for foreign study clause only because we felt it was more procedural. So certainly students can pursue foreign study and work out the credits with their school counselor, but it wasn't something that we felt needed to be in the policy. And then we changed a little bit of the language around the MCAS exam. That was the one bit of input we got from legal counsel. So that was the gist of it. I will add, we had a very robust conversation about thoughts, ideas, vision for the high school, where we would love to see the high school go in terms of course offerings and programs for students. But it was felt that these were some changes that needed to be addressed and made now, and that, with more time, we would like to explore some of those other ideas.
Okay, thank you.
A motion.
Yes, I'll take a motion.
Move to approve the amended policy IKF as presented to the committee via email on October 28th, satisfying the 7-day notice policy.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Chuck. All right, any discussion? Sean?
I just have 2 questions. One, there was one of the emails we got that raised a point which I don't know if it's relevant or not, but around the semester versus year delineation. I don't know if, Tom, if you have a perspective on whether that's significant and something that we should address here. Go ahead, yeah.
I contacted Lena Williams about it this afternoon because, we discussed it obviously in our meeting with her. And I think that when they're talking about a year's class in terms of years, I think the concern, and I know that it was on Facebook as well, is that some years students take they could take geometry and they could take algebra too, for example, their sophomore year. Those are considered, even though it's a calendar year, it's considered 2 years of classes because they double up. And there was also, I think, a concern that a student could take, and let's put it this way, a student who's going to do that and double up in math is taking at least 5 years of math instead of 4 years of math because they're double up.
Right.
She did say that for math classes that they were all full year class except for analytical trade, where they got final grade at the end. The English electives, senior year, so freshman, sophomore, junior year are their classes. Senior year, they take 2 semester classes, right? So nobody would have to petition or anything those classes would be considered a year long of curriculum, even though they're 2 semester classes. The other issue with science is if somebody takes environmental science, and environmental science, that's a year-long class, but if they took, you could take a CP, they have different names for it, wasn't technically environmental science. A college prep environmental science class is only a semester long. So I think the concern that was raised is a moot point.
Okay.
According to the learning guidance.
Sure.
Along those same lines, my comment was more about consistency of language, and if we mean the same things, we talk about credits and years, and the mass core framework uses the word units.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
Sorry, the consistency of language, so the policy refers to credits and years, and the mass core framework refers to units. So just, do they all mean the same thing? Just consistently, how are we referring to things?
So different classes are worth different credits. So, you know, a full year class versus a semester class. So the credits are just to advance from year to year, but the total, you know, years, the total courses is for the graduation.
Right, I guess I understand that because I just think it's confusing.
So I think it sounds like it's two different frameworks. There's a framework around how many credits you need, which are sort of hours of schooling you've completed successfully to advance, right? And then there's a framework around the specific content areas you need and how much of that content you need, and that's what the delineation for years is. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Aaron?
I realized I forgot to add something around the math. So subsequent to our meeting, Kevin Tracy then did meet with Alison Williams, the math department chair, who is on board with this change. We did recommend that it not be official until the class of 2026. The feeling was that for some students, this may require some extra support. Part of what was discussed in regards to budgetary impacts would be the potential of adding a skills, like a study skills lab at the high school. So there's currently a math lab, but there's not something that's more generalized to kids that need study skills support. So that was something that was, you know, potentially discussed as a way that could support a change like this. But so we put 2026 to just sort of give it a little time. The majority of Reading High graduates do already take 4 years of math. So it's a smaller subset that aren't currently taking 4 years.
About 8%.
Yeah, it's small.
Okay, any other questions, comments from anybody?
So just to be clear, are we confident that if we pass this as written, it goes into effect essentially immediately, that there are not current seniors, for instance, who are on track to graduate under the current policy who would then not be on track to graduate? Correct. Are we confident that's the case?
Effective of the only change that's...
Well, decisions becoming intro to health, like I don't...
They haven't had decisions for years.
Okay, yeah.
That was one of the cleanups that we
My oldest kid is 8 years old, so I'm really in this frame.
Ninth grade and 11th grade.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So that's where intro to health and health decisions.
Fifth graders just started learning about puberty in elementary school, so I've still got a couple years before we get started about that discussion, so we're good.
Yeah, the only change here is the math, and that will kick in for the class of 2026.
All right, thank you.
So, Aaron, thank you for bringing up the budget, because I think that's also something, you know, as we think about it, and we talk to FinCom about other supports that our students would need, or this is something in addition to that we haven't already talked about at FinCom, plus the full-day kindergarten. We're talking about a lot of different things. I think we're going to need optionality. You know, when it comes to budget time, we're going to have to make some hard choices, really, to figure out what we're going to fund or how we're going to fund it. But I'm wondering, you know, we are, and I'm picking on my own son to a degree here, we are 3 months in, 2 months into the school year. Is there a reason why we can't just say 2025? I mean, they're not going to miss. If we just started a year earlier, what's the impact to us to say that the 2025 current freshmen, this would be impacted? Was there any conversation about that, or was it just really just, we don't want anybody who's already there to be impacted, even though they still have 3 3/4 of a year left of their high school career? They could probably easily meet this in that time period.
I think that was I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That was a recommendation by the principal and guidance, and I didn't feel like, you know, it was something that we could push back. I mean, that's their sandbox, you know, so.
Okay.
Kevin felt pretty strongly about the skills lab, I'll be honest. I mean, I know, well, we will definitely have a lot of things to consider come budget time. I'm not naive to that at all. But yeah, he felt, being as a parent, I wish it was something we had in place right now, like yesterday. So I understand the need for it, but yeah, so it was the idea of like, we would want to ideally get that in place.
I mean, technically, the 2025, as the 2024, as the 2023, as the 2022, have the option to do 4 years of math already.
Absolutely.
Right? So we're not changing that. This is just saying the requirement is changing. So, right, okay. Dr. Milchester, you going to say something?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, thinking about just being 2 months into the year too. I don't know how much conversation was had with Mr. Tracy or Ms. Williams about that year in particular, knowing they're so early on in their stint in high school. I think that's a fair point. Not a conversation I had with them, so I'm not sure if that was brought up in detail to talk through the 2025 or not, because I think that's a fair point.
Okay. And my last thing is, I hate blue, and where it says blue to me, can we just make all these little blue things correct?
E.g.
Oh, there's no comma.
There's no comma, all of becomes all, anybody objecting to some of these minor changes?
Nope. There was another in order to.
Was there down there? I know there's up top.
Yeah.
Does this have to be a reading?
No, because of the fact that this is an amendment, so amendments disqualified by sending it to you ahead of time. This is going to ask for a comma. This is going to be 4.
So does my motion need to become as amended by Clippy?
As amended by Clippy, sure.
Yeah.
And also, this is going to be dashed. Students progress. This one might be a debate for us. I don't need this anymore. That's
You passed.
Are we good with that? Everybody good with those amendments?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My obsessive compulsive. Chuck, if you want to say more?
Oh, he's voting.
You're voting. All right, so as amended, Sean, are we comfortable with that as a motion?
Yes.
All right, and seconded by Chuck as amended. All right, so all in favor of the policy as amended? All opposed? None, so it passes 6-0. Thank you to the policy subcommittee as well as to Lynn, Sarah, and Kevin for their work on that. Very much appreciated. All right, our last topic before we go into executive session is a topic Sean and I have been discussing with Dr. Milchester and a little bit of, roles and responsibilities and how we make some other maybe bigger changes for some of the existing policies, or maybe new policy creation and where we want the subcommittee to sit versus the school committee to sit, and whether we provide guidance and then it gets done and taken away to the subcommittee, or whether we write it. So Sean, I kind of kicked it off, but you probably will say it in a more erudite way.
Oh, I doubt it'll be erudite, but I'm happy to try. I think when we launched the policy subcommittee, I would say the way that I internalized it was the focus, at least for the near to medium term, really was on sort of updating our policies that were out of date in many ways, right? The mask with mask guidance, with MGL, et cetera. And we didn't necessarily have an explicit conversation about what do we expect the policy subcommittee's role versus the full committee's role to be when there's sort of a substantive change folks would like to see on a policy. And so as an example, 3 of us are not on the policy subcommittee. If one of us had a policy that we wanted to see revised meaningfully, like an actual change in direction, I would find it sort of difficult to not have the opportunity to have some open discussion about what the committee's sort of common objectives or shared understanding of that direction is before kicking it over to a policy subcommittee as an example. And so, Tom laid out a couple of options here, but I think, ways that we could approach this would be when we have a change to a policy on our agenda that is quote unquote substantive, and again, I would frame that as sort of a meaningful change in direction or the creation of a new policy potentially. that we, at a minimum, start with a full committee discussion about, do we have a common set of aims, or, or at least a consensus set of aims, maybe? And then make a determination, maybe on a case-by-case basis, on whether referring it to the policy subcommittee is the right approach, or whether we do, again, something similar to what Carla and I did earlier this year, and, create another group to go do sort of the work in between, the meetings to bring something back to the committee. So, I think everybody knows which policy I want to talk about first, but, I have a particular policy in mind that, I would not, the reason I did not raise my hand or participate in the policy committee is, whatever, we don't need to get into those reasons, but it wasn't because I don't have an interest in weighing in on some of our more significant policy discussions, and I want to see if we're all on the same page about sort of a path forward for those types of discussions versus, updating to bring into sync with mass guidance and things like that. So I'll stop there.
I think, at least you guys, I thought I think we had, our first charge was to clean up the policies and also catalog, which we're still working on. So I don't think I ever envisioned that we were going to start from scratch with a policy. It was going to be, at least in the short term anyway, it was to be to clean up everything that needs to be cleaned up. And then, so I guess this is a good conversation because this might be the next step or not the next step of the policy committee once everything's cleaned up. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just also add that it was my understanding that there might be times where we were saying to the chair, we think this requires discussion and will probably be more than one meeting. So I was not going on the assumption that everything that goes through the policy subcommittee and then comes forward was going to be resolved in one meeting. So what we have been, we were tasked with 4 policies initially, and at least 3 of them have been pretty straightforward.
That's what Taylor was talking about.
So I'll say that. I don't think it's an automatic that when the policy subcommittee moves something forward that we only have one meeting to discuss it. That being said, I do imagine there are policies such as our emergency drill policy that might require more research, more in-depth, and I'm not quite sure that that's what the policy subcommittee was tasked with either. So, I think there's something to be said for, maybe if 2 members want to bring it forward, because we, have said if 2 people request something, and if somebody has done their own research and wants to share that with the committee, and then I think maybe it goes down to the policy subcommittee, but maybe it doesn't. I don't think that has to be an absolute.
Yeah, I don't think the policy subcommittee is the only mechanism to review a policy. I think it was, at least, as I said, I think initially it was more of a maintenance thing, just to clean things up.
I agree that that's the right answer. I think this was a useful conversation to have because the way the charge of the policy subcommittee is laid out, that language around cataloging policies sort of leaves some open-ended, whether or not that is intended to be the ending place for all policy discussions. So, okay. I want to make a formal request for the agenda then in a minute. So.
Yeah, I would say to that as well. I think that's also, this is a beneficial conversation because it gets us on the same page ahead of time, right? So nobody's surprised. Lessons learned in those regards as well. So we continue to move forward. There's some I'd like to talk about from a new policy perspective at some point in time too. So that can certainly be a way, and maybe it becomes. I think one of the kick off a larger discussion and then see if this is something we want to move forward type approach. I would also say, and I think this is potentially not a good way to use some of our other tools. I think that EBC could be a perfect one to put into an advisory committee that comes back to this committee that says this is what we're suggesting. And I think it would be great to put an advisory committee there with Chief Clark, with other members that actually live in the town. Chief Burns lives in the town too. In addition to you and whoever else is passionate from the school committee, I think that would be a good way to move some of that work forward. And with substantive deliverables, and it becomes public, and then we have that conversation with the experts in the room.
Yeah, sure.
Right, I think Ms. Shanklin and Ms. Marchand are both Reading residents as well. So you could have principals that are there if they're so inclined, that bring to that that part of the table. Ms. King used to be, but she's no longer, because I think she moved. But there's other ways that we could achieve that same goal, and we get community involvement as part of that conversation. So.
I think Dr. King still lives in there.
No,
she did? I know she sold her house. I thought she, okay. Anyway.
She lives in an Airbnb.
So anyway, I think there's other ways we can do it too, but that could achieve the same goal.
I'm a sheriff on that.
So, okay.
All right, then can I formally request that we put EBC, emergency plans, on a future agenda as soon as practical.
Yes.
December 2nd. Do you need a second committee member to ask for the same thing?
A second committee member over there from Sarah and a third from Aaron, so I think we've got it covered. December 2nd is getting full pretty quickly.
So we'll be full, we'll throw it on the next meeting.
Yep, he said as soon as practical, so that's good. All right, moving on to the, actually, that's the end of the open sessions. So we're good there at 10:40. So do I have a motion for us to go into executive session?
Move to enter executive session to conduct strategy sessions with respect to negotiations with represented bodies, specifically all of our bargaining units, and with respect to negotiations with non-represented personnel, specifically central office staff and principals, not to return.
And do I have a second? By Carla. Moving into executive session is a roll call vote, so we'll start with the end. Sarah? Aaron?
Aye.
Carla? Aye. Chuck? Aye. Sean?
Aye.
And Tom? Aye.